evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Raleigh City Council meeting. We wish all of you a happy holiday. We're going to start tonight with the public comment period. I would like to remind everybody about the rules of decorum. You have 3 minutes for each person. I want to show you something that the city clerk gave me. In a world where you can be anything, be kind. I think she got the message. That's usually how I start our public comment period. And I would ask for the same, that people show respect and kindness, especially as we enter this holiday season. So we will start tonight with Lisa Huguet.
I can't see the countdown timer.
Actually, I can't see it either. Let's see. There we go.
Okay, let me just move it off to the side so I can see my speech. So good evening. Happy holidays to you all. My name is Lisa Hewitt and I live at 712 Hinsdale Street. My topic tonight is affordable housing. And I apologize in advance to the elf on the shelf if this comes off as a bit negative, but it was written in a bit of frustration after doing some research on our affordable housing situation. This council consistently seems to go against adopted policy by approving large market rate developments and turning a blind eye to preserving affordable housing. Policies that had wide community input, like the 2030 comp plan and small area plans. Your decisions are far from the equitable development you promote and have had a disproportionate effect on low income and our historically Black neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that may not have the means to organize or afford expensive attorneys to establish HOAs. While the recent change to eliminate single-family zoning and allow for multiplex housing might appear to address our lack of affordable housing, I think that thinking is flawed. Those units will still be market rate and will most likely be built in neighborhoods I just mentioned, where land prices will afford the higher construction costs of multiplex units. Research shows over and over that introducing more market rate housing does not bring rents down over time. Instead, property taxes rise sharply and those on fixed incomes get pushed out. This council needs to do everything it possibly can to drive more affordable housing choices in Raleigh. I think the biggest impact is getting with developers when they first make contact with the city. I understand that there used to be a position in one of your departments whose sole responsibility was to work with developers when they submit their first application to educate them on the resources available to build affordable units. Today, by the time a rezoning case gets to you for approval, a lot of decisions and money have already been spent. You're hardly in a position to ask them to go back to the drawing board for conditions. If the city truly wanted to provide affordable housing, you have the means to do so, and I wish you had the political will to do so. Raleigh is a hot market. You're in a position to require developers to put in conditions for affordability. If a developer says no to building affordable units, they can pay in lieu of to our land trust fund. If they don't want to do that, there are other developers right behind that one. You can set this standard. Please, on behalf of your constituents, do whatever is necessary to preserve and provide more affordable housing choices. I know that you can do this. Thank you and happy holidays.
Thank you, Lisa. Happy holidays. Just so you know, Wake County has made preservation of affordable housing one of their top priorities, and it has set aside money for that purpose. And we also are looking at hiring a realtor to help us identify properties that could go on the market. In turn, we could purchase, similar to the hotel that we recently purchased for housing. The suggestion that we can force developers to include affordable units is actually not allowed under state statute. It's called inclusionary zoning, and that is something that we legally cannot do. So I just wanted to clarify that. And if there's any additional questions,
Yeah.
we have people on staff who could meet with you to address that. Okay, thank you. All right, next we have Christina Jones.
Christina Jones, 8005 Finland Drive. I was recently on the Midtown CAC Zoom meeting in which we discussed Z4521. This is a project that will be getting rid of current affordable housing on Navajo Drive. Currently, there's a strong Hispanic and Latino population, and when asked what their plans were for the future affordability, we were told that the topic of affordable housing is ongoing. At their first neighborhood meeting, 15 people attended, and they're not sure when they're going to schedule their second one. I'm confused how this reflects council's vision of inclusivity when so few people who will be affected by this actually know what is happening. Whether you loved them or hated them, CACs were consistent. There was a presentation meeting on a rezoning followed by a vote at the next meeting. Each CAC met on the same day and time each month. Now, rezoning education has been placed into the hands of developers. How do you ensure that they are reaching more people than what we had before? Do you require that developers offer a translator to those who speak another language? CACs were not required to have translators either, but I do think that we can look to that as a goal moving forward so as to make our process more inclusive. In regards to Planning Commission, the process used to be that once those CAC meetings were complete, Planning Commission was able to review votes and read conditions that were agreed upon by residents and developers for a specific case. How are commissioners hearing from the public now? The limited scope of 500 feet has reduced how many people may or may not contact Planning Commission, but since they are all volunteers, how does the city ensure that they have ample time to review a case and get enough resident feedback? As I stated last meeting, I was told that Planning Commission was taking too long with some cases, and I'm not sure how to make that make sense when you guys are the ones who voted to limit their review time from 90 to 60 days. In essence, you have given Planning Commission less time to do more work. As we move into the portion of your term that was not voted on by those who you represent, I challenge you all to make it a point to communicate with residents in your area, whether that be district or at large. Giving your report on decisions that you have already made is a reactive style of governing, and I would love to see a more proactive approach, allowing residents to help inform you of their wants and needs. Decisions made by the city should be informed by the residents who live there. Thank you.
Thank you, and happy holidays to you. Doug Johnston is next.
Hello, I'm Doug Johnston, 120 Forest Road, and I'm very excited to be here at the end of the year, wishing everybody a happy holiday and thanking everyone for being so helpful to me. I feel like I've wandered into the perfect environment for a person who has ideas that to me seem valuable, and then I discover other people do and somebody's listening, so that's always very encouraging. My daughter Helen, who is an electrical engineer, and tells me that I should not ever say to anyone younger than I am they should or ought to do something. And since most of you, of course, are younger than I am, and I'm older than most everyone, that means I have to leave that off the table. But I have started thinking about preparing a 12 days of Christmas list for your consideration. And it has a serious side because a lot of the things that are on this list, it's not complete yet, are things that you will be considering. And by the time you get to them, everything is going so fast, you don't have time for these sort of marginal thoughts like I often share. Not to say that they're not important, but they're not really at the center often of what people are talking about. Nonetheless, I believe eventually they do drift towards the center and become very important. So with that little preview, I will give the reason that I came up with this idea. My daughter, the other one, who is a horse trainer and cellist, gave me a birthday gift of a series of cookie tins, which I got for 6 months. And it seemed to help me remember all the reasons that I really love my daughters. So the chances are, if I have a little sequence of things, maybe one or more of them will attract the attention of some of you and be helpful in your making decisions. Again, thanks everybody, the city clerk especially, always looking after me to make sure I don't get things mixed up. And of course, Beth does a terrific job. Everybody, just wonderful. These slides are some of my favorite places at Dix Park, and I promise you, you'll see them again. Thanks again. Good night.
Good night, Doug. Thank you. And looking forward to seeing what you bring forward. Love the creativity. Next, we have Richard Johnson. Beth, is Richard on the line?
3225 Oak Grove Circle.
Richard, I think we're not hearing you. We just heard part of your address. Mayor, I'm not sure what's going on. Do you want to?
Beth, can you hear me?
I can now. Can you hear us?
Okay, yeah, let's go.
Okay.
All right, 3225 Oak Grove Circle. Like most people, I regularly get emails, text messages, and phone calls from politicians trying to raise money. It truly is a shame that amassing large sums of money has become so critical for those who wish to serve their country or their local community. Too often, it essentially becomes vote buying when politicians are heavily indebted to big donors. We can see that right here in Raleigh. The mayor's sugar daddy, John Kane, his counterparts across the development industry, and even the land use attorneys who earn a living from the development industry have an outsized influence on our city council. And that's not only through helping elect their preferred candidates. Mega donors also influence who serves on the boards and commissions and special study groups that make recommendations to council. For instance, the study group on council terms and compensation has been preloaded to deliver the results that this council majority and their special interest group supporters desire. Until recently, that group was chaired by Eric Brawl, a former land use attorney and mega donor to the current council majority. His megabuck contributions have landed him seats on as many as 4 different advisory groups at the same time. The committee also includes another land use attorney and one individual who currently resides in Portugal. That's weird. Does Raleigh really need absentee landlords setting policy for those who actually live here? These are decisions we'll be living with for a long time. In fact, the study group on council terms and compensation has now been tasked with making recommendations about redistricting. You know, the redistricting that every other North Carolina municipality managed to complete in time to hold census-delayed elections in March of 2022. But in Raleigh, Mayor Baldwin was able to pull off what her role model, Donald Trump, could not. She actually stole an additional 8 months in office. Why was Raleigh unable to do what other cities have done? Is our city staff not capable of doing what Charlotte and Greensboro city staff were able to do? And if not, why not? City manager, can you address this for us? There's really no excuse for this banana republic election scandal. Why is the political establishment largely silent on this issue? How can they not condemn this power-hungry mayor who is violating all kinds of norms as well as outright lying to stay in office as long as she can because she knows that 6 out of 10 voters actually voted against her in 2019? Let's make sure that the true progressive majority, not self-proclaimed fake progressives, show up in November and vote out Mayor Baldwin and the Council of Kane. We want a city that's accessible and welcoming to everyone, not just the mayor's favorite multimillionaires. We want a city that prioritizes people over profits. We want a city that builds for its future without bulldozing its past. We don't want the city of Oaks to turn into the city of stumps. We don't want the city of Oaks to turn into the city of stumps.
Richard, happy holidays to you and staff. Next, we have Adina Safta.
Mayor, Adina is not on the call.
Okay, next we have Terry Snyder.
Good evening. My name is Terry Snyder, and I live at 1316 Westfield Avenue. Over the past 49 years that I have lived in West Raleigh, I've witnessed significant changes in development. One of the most alarming negative consequences is the vanishing affordable housing for low, middle, and low-income residents. Affordable apartments and housing continue to be bulldozed at a rate that far exceeds replacement units. One of the largest tragedies is the demolition of country club homes, as it negatively impacts affordable housing and the environment. There are many stories out there about people losing their homes, many of whom are forced into homelessness. I want to share just two of those situations that I know personally. Lance and Jerry are two homeless friends currently living out of Lance's car. Both are good, honest, kind men who have had to deal with dire life circumstances that neither you nor I have had to face. Jerry is a 57-year-old war veteran who was seriously wounded in Iraq in 2007. He draws Medicaid and SNAP. He should be eligible for SS disability and veteran benefits, but the system has failed him. Lance is 69 years old and has experienced traumatic life events that he has not been able to overcome. He receives Medicare, Medicaid, and only $700 a month in SS benefits. They lived in a rooming house for 3.5 years until they were evicted due to an unaffordable increase in rent. Since then, they've spent the last 2.5 years living out of Lance's car. They were discovered by members of our church when they regularly came to get a bag lunch from our feeding ministry program. Our church community has taken them under our wing to help them get the assistance they deserve and to help them find an affordable apartment. The clincher is there's no known appropriate affordable housing available to them in Raleigh. Second situation, hundreds of Afghan refugees are being relocated to North Carolina, with many of them coming to Raleigh. This organization is partnering with a nonprofit Green Share project in order to relocate them. Our church is adopting a refugee family to welcome them, set up their apartment, and assist them in acclimating to our culture. The clincher, there are no affordable apartments in Raleigh currently available, and extended time hotel stays are being considered. Various nonprofit organizations and faith communities are banding together to address the dire situation of lack of affordable housing. As you know, One Wake is pushing hard for tax relief, but only you as City Council have the power and authority to access resources and to establish requirements to mitigate and rectify this problem. There is so much you can do. Tax relief, aging in place assistance, moratorium on tearing down affordable housing, restricting zoning, incentives to builders to build affordable housing, transferring TIGs to developers who will adequately and significantly address affordable housing needs. One very significant way is to motivate and require developers to do their share and participate in providing
Terry, your time
housing.
is up. Thank you. Happy holidays to you, and we appreciate your comments. Next, we have Leon Cook.
Good evening, Leon Cook, 1500 Whittington Drive. And I take my time and applaud Lisa Hewitt, the first speaker, second one, Christina, and the fifth one, Terry Snyder. Excellent, excellent comments. And I hope everyone on that city council hears them, including the city manager. These people are working hard to get affordable housing for people who don't have the means to be able to, and every decision that the city is making in reference to housing, which you ran on for affordable housing, it's not being done. You're going counter to what you promised to do. That being said, I am calling in reference to the study committee on council terms and salaries. There came a survey which so far provided input from 1,807 Raleigh residents. That represents 0.4% of the 465,000 residents in Raleigh. So much for comprehensive community engagement. In the survey, one question asks if you want to add one additional district, yes or no. There is no option if you want to add more than one. So if you disagree with adding only one, you vote no. Another question, do you want to add another at-large council person, yes or no? There is no option to not have any at-large positions. See where I'm going? This survey is rigged to produce expected outcomes, not necessarily reflecting what residents want. In addition, the survey group did not recommend adding an at-large position. So where is the study group on this? Requiring district council persons to represent 90,000 plus residents is a bit much. Why not add 3 to 5 more districts without any at-large positions? I am requesting that you take these additional options under consideration. After all, due to your astute political foresight, we now have until November 2022 to cast our votes, while the rest of Wake County municipalities have already selected their councils, except Cary, which is holding their elections March 2022. Thank you very much and have a happy holidays to all.
Happy holidays to you too, Leon. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to go to matters scheduled for public hearing. The first item on our agenda is the Dorothea Dix Park naming request.
Thank you, Mayor, members of City Council. I'm Tansy Hayward, Deputy City Manager. On tonight's hearing, you're going to consider a proposed naming for the city's planned investments in the Play Plaza at Dix Park. I want to give brief background for the public on the process. On May 19th of 2020, the City Council approved execution of a memorandum of understanding with the Dix Park Conservancy, and relevant to the hearing tonight, the Conservancy was identified as the sole private nonprofit fundraising partner for Dix Park. And as a part of that agreement outlined how the city would recognize donors through naming as a result of their fundraising. And the MOU outlined a number of guidelines for naming. First, that any naming proposal would be consistent with the city's naming policy, that the recognition would be scaled appropriately to the gift, that the recognition would be sensitive to park views, to the operations, and to the general aesthetic of the park, that any recognition agreement could not obligate the city to future specific expenditures, and the MOU outlined a number of provisions for the kinds of names that could not be considered, things like alcohol, tobacco, or politically motivated names. The MOU also addressed how amendments or revisions or termination would be handled over time. Those could be things that would come at the request of the donor. They could be reacting to circumstances where a pledge was not fulfilled, or in future cases of moral, ethical breaches of law or other acts of moral turpitude. In terms of the process under the naming policy, the city manager is required to notify the council confidentially of a proposal for a name. Then the city is required to post notice on the city's website 10 days before a hearing, which is what is occurring tonight. That notice was given on the city's website on November 26th. The proposal under consideration tonight is to name about 18.5 acres within Dix Park, name it the Gibson Play Plaza. If approved, the term of the name would be for 30 years, commencing following the execution of the funding agreement. I would like to recognize Janet Cowell, who's with us tonight. She is the President and Chief Executive Officer for the Dix Park Conservancy, and she's prepared to make a few additional remarks. Following her remarks, both Ms. Cowell and I are available for any questions preceding the hearing.
Good evening. I want to thank all of you for serving on City Council and listening to all these public comments and the citizenry and having me here this evening. And I also want to thank staff for all the work they have done with Dix Park, including Tansy Hayward, who just spoke. So I am Janet Cowell, and head of Dix Park Conservancy, and I am here tonight to ask for the council's support to grant the naming rights for the 18.5-acre Play Plaza within Dix Park to Pat and Tom Gibson and their family to be known as the Gibson Play Plaza in exchange for their gift of $10 million. This is an important moment, one, because it's a transformational gift for Dix Park and the city of Raleigh, $10 million, I mean, as we all know, is a lot of money. It's a very generous amount, and it will enable us to build a world-class playground that wouldn't be feasible if it were just public dollars. Secondly, it's an important moment because this agreement sets the tone and defines the experience for other private individuals and entities to come forth with gifts that can expand the capacity of the City of Raleigh to undertake other large and ambitious projects. I also wanted to point out this is the first time since 2015 when the partnership between the Conservancy and the city was formed that we have come forth to you with a naming rights agreement. The reason that it's been 6 years is that we have worked with the staff and agree that we don't want to have a commercialized park. We've all said this is a park for everyone, and so we wanted it to be very limited naming rights. At the same time, we have worked with you to say that the Conservancy will raise $60 million so that this park can serve everyone in ways that wouldn't otherwise be possible. And to help us achieve that ambitious goal of $60 million, we did come up with some naming rights and donor recognition opportunities. We're coming forth to you now thanks to your generous advancement of $12 million to enable this Play Plaza to start this coming summer. Once you did that, and as we started talking about that groundbreaking, Pat and Tom Gibson came forth with a passionate interest in potentially being the donors who would have these naming rights. And I'm going to let some others from the Dix Park Conservancy speak more about the Gibsons, their track record in this community as Raleigh citizens, their involvement with Dix Park, and their other philanthropic and volunteer activities. Just to point out, we have been adhering to the process that you laid out in July with your naming rights and policies. And as Ms. Hayward said, we have presented information for you on the donors. This is at the culmination of 10 days of public comment, and I would just passionately request your support for the Gibson Play Plaza and honoring Pat and Tom as well as their entire family and their contributions. I've also got other members of the Dix Park Conservancy Board here with me to speak on behalf of the Gibsons and this naming rights agreement, and those are Orge Quarles, who is our board chair, Ed Fritsch, who is our campaign cabinet chair, and then finally the Honorable Nancy McFarland, who is a member of the leadership committee for the Conservancy in the city and our marketing chair. So with that, again, ask for your support and thank you again.
Okay, thank you. Before I open the hearing, I'm going to ask if there's any questions for staff. Okay, I'm going to open the hearing then. First, we have signed up to speak. There'll be a total of 8 minutes. If we could put down on the countdown timer, please. There's nobody signed up to speak against this. So we will have 8 minutes. R.H. Quarles, Ed Fritsch, and former Mayor Nancy McFarland are here to speak. They have signed up. So if we could have the first speaker.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is R.H. Quarles, currently the chair of the Dix Park Conservancy. Thank you so much for allowing us to talk this evening about Tom and Pat Gibson and their generosity toward the Conservancy and the city building a world-class park. We are excited, and I say that, I'm understating that, to have someone who has done so much for our community. And as I heard earlier, the comments around affordable housing, I want to remind the council and the mayor that Tom Gibson was honored by our President Obama for his great work in helping Habitat for Humanity with a national effort to build, at that time, almost 500 houses in 1 week. So he has a long track record of serving this community, and we are delighted and honored that they have chosen the park with their contribution. I'll stop now and let Ed. Happy holidays to all of you.
Happy holidays, Orage. Ed Fritsch, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief as well. I, like so many people, are uber excited about the generosity of this and the transformational impact of this potential gift. Just a quick context. I started working on the vision of a park when Greg Poole visited with me over a dozen years ago. I have since participated in seemingly countless meetings in pursuit of Greg's dream. I now volunteer through the Conservancy and invest considerable time in pursuit of its mission to raise money to measurably assist our city in funding the park. Many of us have dedicated years of time and thousands of hours towards philanthropy for the park. We have been fortunate to have engaged generous, caring, community-dedicated people and entities who are donating meaningful sums. The work has not been easy, and asking for money is seldom a comfortable act. However, this is vital work, and this particular potential donation is very unusual in size, generosity, and its source. I have known the Gibsons for many years. I have been in their home, the same one that they have lived in for 40 years, and I know of their humility and genuineness. They are meek, unassuming in manner, warm in their friendships, and unbelievably generous with their resources. The Gibsons have earned their money through a long and dedicated career of hard work and sacrifice right here in Raleigh. The Gibsons also have a long history of community backing, supporting dozens of diverse charities over many years, most notably their involvement in Habitat for Humanity and Tom's invention of Builders Blitz, whereby professional builders and suppliers collaborate to build homes at no to low cost in a very short period of time. Tom's idea was so successful that it became a national initiative. Now, in their fourth quarter of life, Tom and Pat look to pass a very meaningful portion of their life savings towards the construction of Dix Park. They have invested a significant amount of time discerning over where to make an impactful community investment, and we are beyond fortunate to have these two gracious and unselfish, hardworking neighbors of all of ours to have chosen Dix Park for this very sizable gift. I wholeheartedly endorse them receiving naming recognition for the mammoth size of this potential gift and the spirit in which they are offering it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ed. Happy holidays to you and yours.
Thank you.
Mayor McFarland.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, Council and City Manager, City Attorney, and Gail. Hi, Gail. Thanks for allowing me to speak to you all this evening. I am here as a member of the Dix Park Conservancy. And as you've heard the speakers before me, we're asking you to please approve this naming rights agreement for the Plaza Play area of Phase 1. As you know, I've been on both sides of the table. I've sat where you're sitting now, and when we worked to both secure acquisition of the park for the people of Raleigh and to develop the master plan with over 65,000 pieces of input. We all know the citizens of Raleigh love their parks. Our park systems is one of the things that really sets Raleigh apart from other cities. And I just want to tell you about something that happened to me a few years ago that really helped shape my understanding of their importance. I was working at a poll on election day, and a woman came up to me and she said, "I just want to thank you for Raleigh's park system. I am a single mother of 2 children and I work all the time. I can't afford to take my kids away on vacations, but we can spend the day together in one of Raleigh's parks, and it's an escape for us. We get to spend time together, have a great time, and really feel like it's a getaway. I couldn't do that without our parks." So that's really always stayed with me. And if you think about the number of people that really took part in the development of this master plan, you know how important this is for all of us. And, you know, we are, as Ed said, we are so fortunate that we have people in this community, people like the Gibsons, that understand how important our parks are for all of us, and that they're willing to donate large amounts of money to help make this happen, because they really do understand that parks build community. They bring us together and they provide opportunity for everyone. And especially, I mean, Dix Park, this will be like nothing Raleigh or really anyone near us has ever seen. So we've worked very, very hard with the community to develop this master plan, and now it's time to execute that. And I know you all are working hard, and the Conservancy's working hard, and we both have an obligation to fulfill that promise. We really are partners of this, and I know neither one of us can do it alone. So I hope you will join with us in not only improving this request, but in thanking all of those community partners that believe in this project and this city enough to support us in building what's actually been called the most important and exciting park project in America today. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy holidays to you and your family.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here with us today. And thank you for your work on Dix Park. It wouldn't have happened without you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, as I said, no one has signed up to speak against. I'm going to close the hearing. There were no additional questions for staff, so I'm going to ask if anybody would like to make a motion. Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may, just a brief comment before I move to accept or authorize this gift. I want to say thanks to the Gibsons for their generosity and their spirit of giving back. A long time ago was involved with Habitat about the time that the Builder Blitz was a big thing, and although I've never met the Gibsons, I was always impressed with that effort and again their generosity with the community. And what a special moment for Dix Park. It is going to be a world-class park for everyone, and this Plaza Play, named after the Gibson family, will be a flag planted in the ground to get us started. And this is a really special night. And unless there are other comments from the council, I'd move that we approve the gift, and with our thanks to the Gibsons.
Okay, that has been seconded by Councilmember Knight. Councilmember Branch, did you have a question? No? Okay. All right, so yes, Councilmember Knight.
I'd like to make a comment when appropriate. I'm sure others will as well.
Well, I'm calling for the vote, so if you would like to make a comment now.
Yeah, well, I just want to say how excited I am about this. I think this is a monumental day in the history of Dix Park. As Ms. Cowell said, transformational. Maybe even beyond that. I know Greg Poole was referenced. I think he's looking down tonight and smiling on all of us because this is such a big deal. And just to say thank you so much to the Gibsons. I don't know them, but what they've done for the city, for this country, really, in doing this is it goes beyond the pale, and it's just unbelievable. And it's great that they've been here for so long. They're true longtime Raleigh citizens, and they know how important this park is and can be for the city as well as the rest of the country. So kudos to them, and please pass that along, Ms. Cowell. And I just want to say thanks to all the work that Dix Park Conservancy is doing that shows that they are stepping up. They're doing their part, maybe more than their part. They said how much they're going to raise, and they're committed do that. It certainly puts pressure on the rest of us, puts the onus on us to do our part, and I think we are going to be able to do that. But I just want to thank Ms. Cowell, the director, as well as Mr. Quarles and Mr. Fritz, as well as our former mayor, Madam Farland, who maybe was more instrumental than anybody else to make this purchase happen for the city. And so thank them for their leadership as community leaders. And thank you, Mayor, yourself, for your leadership currently in this. And I look forward to making this come to fruition, the Play Plaza. And this has been a big night. And thanks again, and pass that along to the Gibsons.
Okay, so I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Anyone opposed? Okay, clerk, that passes unanimously. I would like to add my genuine thanks to the Gibsons for their generosity with this gift. This is a wonderful legacy, but it will be a legacy that all our children can enjoy. And I just want to say thank you. This is really heartfelt. Thank you to the Conservancy for what you've done. This is a special moment for all of us and for Dix Park and for our community. So thank you. All right. Next, we have the Annual Housing Action Plan.
Good evening, Mayor, members of Council, Larry Jarvis, Housing and Neighborhoods. And again, most of you remember that HUD requires 2 public hearings annually, one at the beginning of the action plan process to identify needs and priorities, and then as that plan is drafted prior to submission to HUD, an additional public hearing on that draft plan. We can pull up the presentation now, please. So again, we are at the first public hearing tonight. So the agenda is just to give you an overview, goals and priorities of the 5-year consolidated plan, programs, timeline, and then citizen participation. So again, the action plan is our application to HUD. It's a framework for our annual strategic and production goals. It has to align with the approved 5-year consolidated plan, and we are now in the 3rd year of implementation of the current COM plan. So the goals and priorities of that 5-year plan: increase the supply of affordable housing, increase services to build self-sufficiency and sustainability, and enhance the homeless to housing continuum. So programs have to serve primarily low to moderate income residents. We do that by helping them with home ownership, affordable housing development, focusing a lot on homelessness and public services and public facility improvements. So in terms of the schedule, again, our first public hearing is tonight. The second public hearing will be in April, and then in May, City Council will be asked to approve the adoption of the action plan and submission to HUD. So there are various ways that citizens can weigh in on needs and priorities in addition to participating in the public hearing. We will be having 3 in-person community input sessions early in 2022, and citizens as always submit written comments to Housing and Neighborhoods by cdinfo@raleighnc.gov. So I think we do have some folks signed up to speak.
Thank you, Larry. Yes, we have 4 people who have signed up to speak, 3 minutes per person. Please stay within your time frame so I don't have to interrupt. I hate doing that. So the first person we have, I'm going to open the hearing. The first person we have speaking is Kristen Havlick.
Not on the call, Mayor.
Okay. Next is Serena Johnson.
Also not on the call, Mayor.
Okay. Next is Octavia Rainey.
Good afternoon. Happy holidays to everyone.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. I would like to speak on 3 parts. The first part is the analysis of impediment. In order to do the consolidated plan, you must do the analysis of impediment. I have followed the city of Raleigh since 1988 when they first introduced the analysis of impediment. I am very concerned that the city do not follow the analysis of impediment at all. It really concerns me that here you have a city since 1988 and have not enforced the analysis of impediment. I think that it is time that the city takes the analysis of impediment seriously, not to rubber stamp it, but seriously take every aspect, every part of it. And the first thing, you must give the Fair Housing Hearing Board enforcement powers. Recently, you've passed all of this new legislation, but there's no enforcement of that legislation on top of enforcement of the Fair Housing Act itself. So it really concerns me, and I must remind the council that although you have the state, but that is a gentleman's agreement. As large as the city is, the city should be enforcing its own act. And that really bothers me. I have 40 years of experience, and the city do not enforce the AI. Now, I could go into 12 parts of the AI, but time does not permit. But I think that it is a serious problem here. You do this year after year since 1988, and you don't enforce. You don't do anything. Second of all, CDBG has more than one focus on housing. And I challenge Larry that when he opened up the CDBG hearing, tell everybody all of the activities of CDBG. Not one part of it, but it has a huge part of what you can do with the funding. Third, I think it is time for the city to pick a project and looking at all the eligibility of the CDBG and stop moving out black folk. You don't preserve black neighborhoods at all. I am doing a tour in December of the inner city neighborhoods to point out you have not saved not one black neighborhood, not one. And my bus is halfway full, not one. This goes back to the Raleigh Redevelopment Commission of 1947.
Octavia, your time is up.
Thank you.
All right.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, and please remember you can submit written comments as well.
Oh, I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Next we have Jackie Alea. Is Jackie on the phone, Beth?
Hi, I'm here. Just waiting for the unmute. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Baldwin and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on the annual action plan tonight. My name is Jackie Ayala. I'm the Director of Advocacy for Habitat for Humanity of Wake County. As most of you know, Habitat partners with the community and local families to build safe, affordable homes. And we've built over 850 homes in Wake and Johnson County since 1985, over 600 of which are in Raleigh. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Wake Affordable Housing Coalition, which is an assembly of nonprofit organizations working together to provide affordable housing opportunities throughout the county. This includes Families Together, Passage Home, the Raleigh Area Land Trust, the Raleigh Wake Partnership to End and Prevent Homelessness, CASA, Oak City Cares, and Southeast Raleigh Promise. The coalition is encouraged by the steps outlined in the annual action plan to address resident needs across the affordable housing continuum. We strongly support the city's efforts to fund the construction of new affordable multifamily rental units and affordable units for first-time homebuyers. We also commend the city for investing in housing rehabilitation and preservation programs, which help prevent displacement and allow residents to have safe living conditions. The city's investments in the homeless to housing continuum for rapid rehousing efforts and maintaining high-quality shelters are also critical to our community's future, and future annual action plans should continue to prioritize the needs of these residents. But the need is great, and 1 in 4 families currently lack access to affordable housing. COVID has only exacerbated the situation, putting more people at risk of eviction and displacement, and so we need more new affordable units. In addition to the steps outlined in the annual action plan, the Wake Affordable Housing Coalition encourages the city to allocate 25% of its $73 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding towards affordable housing, particularly to land acquisition and new construction. The city should implement a robust land banking strategy to ensure possible future development of affordable housing. City-owned land should be allocated to nonprofit affordable housing providers instead of being sold on the open market and using the funds to invest in affordable projects. Nonprofit affordable developers like ours are currently unable to compete in the open market for land, so leveraging city land is one of our only options. We should also reevaluate the development and review process for affordable housing projects to expedite the process and help affordable developers save time and resources. And we recommend that the city extend property tax relief to longtime homeowners with low incomes through a grant program. Since 2016, property taxes have skyrocketed, increasing in some places by as much as 150%. These tax increases are disproportionately impacted in neighborhoods where Black families were historically segregated and remain underserved. We ask that the city address these disparities through its affordable housing strategy. Thank you so much to the city staff and leadership for your work to provide affordable housing. We hope that you'll consider our feedback, and I hope that you also know Habitat Wake and the members of the Wake Affordable Housing Coalition are committed to working with you all the way through. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will close the hearing, and then staff will continue this discussion and continue meeting with the public and getting public comment. Councilmember Branch?
Yes, I would just ask if our communications department can get out the email link and everything for people to send in comments. I know we had some speakers today doing public comments that spoke to housing, and if they have any of the suggestions or ideas outside of what they stated, that could be a great opportunity. So they'll have the email in which they can send that information in. So since we are collecting data and looking for solutions as we move forward. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Knight, did you have a comment?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to say that I've met with Miss Aila, and I'm sure many of you have as well. And I think her and her organization have some great points to make. I think her team and the rest of the Wake Affordable Housing Coalition are key partners as we move forward in this process. So I just want to reiterate to Mr. Jarvis and his team to really listen closely to these folks who work in the field every day, as y'all do, and listen to them critically, because I think they have some great points to help us in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, next we have annexation petition for 3033 Walkingtown Road.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council. My name is Walter, Raleigh Planning and Development. This first annexation on the public hearing agenda is concurrent with the second public hearing item on the agenda this evening, which is a rezoning request. I'm going to provide you with a combined presentation on the two requests, and then you will want to hold a separate public hearing for each item. If you are not inclined to rezone, you should not probably approve the annexation. And if you're not inclined to annex, you can't rezone. So this is a request for just under 100 acres. The land is contiguous with our corporate limits, but outside of our ETJ. And it's located in Council District B on either side of Watkinstown Road, south of Watkins Road. There is utility access from the north and northwest part of the site. And the rezoning request is a split zone request. So we're going from R30, which is the county's residential district, which requires about 30,000 square feet per unit, to a combination of R6 with conditions and then a general use R6 space district. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, and the Planning Commission does recommend approval. So this is the site, again, southeast of downtown on the east side of the Neuse River. A couple of views of the site. There's some conditions here. So they have provided that at least 40% of the site will be open space, and that will be adjacent to 40% of the lots, and that 60% of that open space provided would be contiguous. Maximum of 280 dwelling units, and no more than 190 of those can be detached, and apartments are prohibited. So that basically suggests duplex and townhouse as the alternative to detached. Stormwater regulations, they're imposing additional regulation on themselves in addition to the usual 2 and 10 year. They're also managing the 25-year storm. And then they are providing a protective yard along the northern property line where there's already existing residential development. They're making some specifications about what development would be like in the event of a conservation development in condition number 5. And then they are limiting the location of townhouse and duplex in relationship to that northern property line. And they are making some provisions about access to Watkinstown Road from the west. So you can see on this diagram that area where townhouses would be prohibited by the conditions. So the change here is an increase in the residential density, and then the setbacks for townhouse are less than they would be for the detached house. That is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. Now, so this is outside our ETJ, remember, but adjacent to corporate limits, and so inconsistent with policies in the comprehensive plan about our priority in terms of areas for growth. Nonetheless, the Planning Commission recommends approval. What questions could I answer for you before you open the public hearing? As far as I know, the applicant is signed up to speak on both of these items, but there's no one, I believe, signed up in opposition.
Do we have any questions for staff? Councilmember Knight?
Maybe this is better for the applicant to answer, but why are apartments prohibited?
I think that is a better question for the applicant. Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. Collier Marsh has signed up to speak on behalf of the applicant.
Okay, Mayor, just one thing. This is the annexation hearing, just the annexation hearing.
Yes, so this is the annexation piece. But Collier, you might have heard the question that was asked.
Yeah. Good evening, Mayor Baldwin. Yes, I can answer that question. This is Collier Marsh with Parker Poe, 301 Fayetteville Street on behalf of the applicant. If it pleases the council, what I'd like to do is just offer a truncated presentation on both the annexation and the rezoning, so you can consider them concurrently to inform your both votes. And I'll make sure to touch on Councilmember Knight's question. Next slide, please. So again, here's a site we're looking at. It's roughly 102 acres along Watkinstown Road in northeast Raleigh. Just to highlight one nuance of this request, that red section of the northeast corner, it's included in this rezoning request in the annexation petition. However, it's proposed to be rezoned R6 without the conditions. The reason being that the folks that live there want to maintain their home site as is. Next slide, please. So the future land use map designation for this site is primarily low density residential. That's that light yellow color throughout the site. Councilmember Knight, that's a lot of what guided this process when we looked at it, is what was the future land use map designation. The low density residential is what we were trying to match, and I'll talk more on some of the other goals with this and reasons why we reached that determination on the specific uses. But low density residential with a small section of open space, public parks, and open space on the western boundary shown in green. What we've tried to do is create a rezoning that conforms to both designations by providing a mixture of residential unit uses, but also providing a substantial amount of open space, which we think is the key commitment of this rezoning. Next slide, please. So the rezoning itself is an R6 CU request. And we started the rezoning process with 3 conditions that we think are the key commitments to this request. What the conditions do is ensure our commitment to develop under the conservation development option. And so this, as far as we know, is the only project of a scale anywhere near this that's committed to the conservation development option. What that means is that we're committing to a minimum 40% of the site as open space, here with 102 acres, over 40 acres of open space. And then other requirements to mimic those conservation development option requirements, just to make it clear that's our intent. 40% of lots have to abut that open space, and 60% of open space has to be contiguous. Next slide, please. So we had extensive discussions with neighbors throughout this process, and Councilmember Knight, this could address your questions. Folks were pretty concerned with any development in this area, and particularly concerned with density of uses, with even townhome uses. And so we worked hard to try and create a transition of uses to help set a development pattern that could lead to perhaps future apartment development following the trend that we're setting in the area. So that's one of the goals with this rezoning, is to create a pattern to support future development that creates the full mix that we'd like to see here. So in response to the extensive neighborhood feedback that we received and multiple meetings outside of that neighborhood meetings that are required in the rezoning process, we added a number of conditions, 8 total conditions, to address that feedback, address things like density, lot sizes, buffers, the other topics we see on this slide. Next slide, please. So again, to address that feedback, we ultimately limited density to 280 residential units, with 190 units being single family. So that means that of that allowed 280, to assuming it's full build out, at least 90 townhome units. The chart shows a number of densities to serve as a basis of comparison. But the thing that really we want to point out is if you look to that Willow Lake community to the north, which serves as the presidential development in the area, we're seeking essentially a similar development intensity or density overall, but we're accomplishing it with a substantial amount of open space that's missing from that Willow Lake neighborhood. Next slide, please. So to ensure the transition that we've been exploring with this site, we've committed to larger lot sizes for single family development. Again, assuming that we develop under the conservation development option, and we've committed to those open space requirements. We'd increase that minimum lot size from 4,000 square feet by 50% to 6,000 square feet. And then for all single family units that are adjacent to the northern property line, for all perimeter lots, we apply all conventional lot requirements. So the more strict width, depth, and setback requirements also apply to those sites, again, ensuring transitions to that neighboring development to the north. Next slide, please. We added a number of conditions that ensure buffers from the neighboring area. We've got the perimeter lot dimensions that I just mentioned. The second condition requires a minimum 18-foot wide, but average 20-foot wide vegetated buffer. And then the third condition essentially provides clarity as to where townhomes would go. And this sets that development pattern that we'd envision with this area. So you see that blue line running, I guess, horizontally on the slide here. That's the offset line where townhomes are now permitted moving south, and it tells you where townhomes would go, essentially focused, at least when you're on the western side of Watkinstown Road, below that line. Now, the parcel directly east of Watkinstown Road does not have that same restriction, and townhomes are permitted throughout that parcel. Next slide, please. And again, getting to the question that you asked, Councilmember Knight, we are proposing a mixture of residential uses here, single family and townhomes, and are working to create a development pattern to ensure a greater mix in the future. Next slide, please. And then we've added conditions to address stormwater concerns to control to the 25-year storm event. Next slide, please. To address concerns related to circulation, we've added a commitment to have 2 access points from the west of Watkinstown Road, again, ensuring that we're not relying on adjacent properties for access to our site. Next slide, please. And then this slide again shows the cumulative impact of all of those conditions, how we lay out development and ensure transitions to existing residential uses. But not to be lost in this, again, is that commitment to have the conservation development option, which again means there's over 40 acres of open space throughout this site. And there will be a greenway easement on the western edge as part of this development as well. Next slide, please. So the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, the future land use map. It's compatible with the surrounding area. And this was recommended by the Planning Commission for approval. So we respectfully request your vote to approve the annexation petition first and then the rezoning subsequently, but are happy to answer any additional questions.
Okay, thank you. First, I just wanted to mention the timer. I was timing this because I didn't see the timer on. So thank you for staying within the allotted time. And I just want to ask first off if there are any questions related to the annexation. Okay, not hearing any, I'm going to close the hearing and ask for a motion. Councilmember Cox?
Yes, this is in my district, and I did receive emails from a couple citizens concerned about growing density and adding more people to this area, largely because of the traffic congestion that is continuing to increase in this area. However, that said, I mean, my evaluation is that I think this is a good development. It will help meet the demand for housing and the kind of housing that people are looking to purchase. And so I would make a motion to approve the annexation.
Okay, do we have a second? Councilmember Buffkin has seconded that. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, clerk, that was unanimous. That was related to the annexation. Now we'll go to the rezoning case. Staff, do you have anything you want to say before I open the hearing? You were muted.
No, ma'am, I don't have any further remarks.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for staff on the rezoning? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. Councilmember Knight.
A question for the applicant when you get there.
Okay, I've opened the hearing. We will hear from the applicant. Collier, are you there still?
Good evening. Yes, I'm here. I don't have anything further to present, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, appreciate your focus on open space and keeping as much open space as possible. I'd like to know if how you're gonna, it looks like you have quite a bunch of mature trees and a canopy going through parts of this development or parts of these parcels. Are you trying to tie that in to keep the current these current canopy there, or is the open space plan separated or distinct from what's already there?
Councilmember Knight, you've hit the nail on the head with the areas that we intend to preserve, which is riparian areas, first and foremost, existing trees. There's water features, ponds on the site. And so those are the things that we prioritize and have envisioned, I guess, developing around ensuring, nice walking areas and things of that nature.
Awesome. Good. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other questions of the applicant? Okay, I'm then going to close the hearing, if that's okay with the applicant.
That's fine. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask for a motion. Councilmember Cox.
I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Do we have a second? Councilmember Melton has seconded. All in favor? Okay, that was unanimous, clerk. Thank you. Okay, next we have rezoning Z3021 on 5904 Creedmoor Road. Again, no one has signed up to speak in opposition. Hear from staff.
Good evening, Hannah Reckow, Raleigh Planning and Development. Request Z3021, request to rezone 5904 Creedmoor Road, just under 2.5 acres from residential 4 to community mixed use 3 stories, parking limited conditional use. The request is consistent with the future land use map and the 2030 comprehensive plan overall, and the Planning Commission recommended approval. The location, this is in north part of Raleigh, east side of Creedmoor Road, near the intersection with West Millbrook Road, near Jeffrey Grove Magnet Elementary School. And you have seen in the last year a few other rezoning requests along this portion of Creedmoor Road. Some views of the site from its frontage on Creedmoor Road, looking north and south. This request includes 5 zoning conditions. These prohibit uses otherwise permitted in commercial mixed use and limit the overall size of office and medical use to a maximum of 35,000 square feet and limit residential uses to multi-unit living and no more than 125 units. And the conditions also apply some requirements to retail sales that locate on the site, including locating within a multi-tenant building, limiting the overall size of the retail sales, applying hours of operation, and prohibiting drive-through and drive-ins. And finally, a zoning condition requiring full cutoff light fixtures in pedestrian parking areas and neighborhood transitions. The change here is from a residential district to a mixed-use district. So an increase in residential density and adding non-residential uses, including office and retail, and all of these are limited by the zoning conditions. So the request is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, including the future land use map and policies, especially those on encouraging compact development and managing the impacts of new commercial uses, and setting up zoning to support housing development. And no inconsistent policies were found. And then again, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval. That's the conclusion of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for staff? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing then. As I said, no one has signed up in opposition. I believe we have Chad Essick for the applicant.
Mayor, good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. Chad Essick with Port Spruill, 301 Fayetteville Street, Suite 1900. Here this evening on behalf of the applicant. Hannah's a very nice job reviewing the rezoning request. So as she knows, consistent with the comprehensive plan, the future land use map, and there are no identified inconsistent policies. I've not been contacted by anyone since the notices went out. I've spoken with Councilmember Buffkin about the case and sent the council members an email summarizing. I'm happy to go through my presentation, but in the interest of time, unless there's any questions, I'm happy to just ask the council to respectfully approve the rezoning case.
Hey, do we have any questions of the applicant? Okay, our technology is messing up again, echoing, so bear with us. Do we have any questions for the applicant? Okay, I'm then going to close the hearing. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. Members of council, as you heard Mr. Essex say, been no known opposition to this case, and I therefore move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Okay, do we have a second? Councilmember Branch is seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, that was unanimous, clerk. Thank you. Next, we have rezoning Z3121 on National Drive.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. I'm John Anagnos from the Planning and Development Department. You saw this case at your November 16th meeting where you opened and closed the public hearing. Due to an error in the notice for that hearing, there is another hearing scheduled for this evening. In addition to that, the applicant has submitted additional revisions to the conditions during the interim. And so just a quick reminder, this is a site of about 11 acres in the Glenwood Exchange Office Park at the southeast quadrant of Glenwood Avenue and I-440. And it was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission and is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. Next slide, please. So there were a number of existing conditions. I'm not going to read through all of those. If we could go to the next slide, we'll see a couple of the changes that were submitted by the applicant since the last meeting. One of those was about a planting area along the I-440 on-ramp, specifying that a certain portion of those plantings for that landscape area would have to be evergreen. And then there are 2 areas identified in the revised conditions on the site where there are additional height regulations. One of those is in the northeast area of the area proposed for commercial mixed-use 12 zoning, where the height would be limited to 5 stories, and then another area to the west of that where the height would be limited to 10 stories. Next slide, please. There's also a series of conditions regulating screening and treatment of the exterior of parking structures. Additionally, a final condition setting a maximum number of buildings in the portion of the site proposed to be rezoned to commercial mixed use 12 stories. That would be a maximum of 3 buildings that could be greater than 10 stories in that area. So that's a summary of the revisions to the conditions since you last saw this case. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. We can take down the presentation. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for staff? And I just want to say as a reminder, no one has signed up in opposition on this. Any questions for staff? Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to open the hearing. I believe Michael Birch is on the line on behalf of the applicant.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Mayor, Michael Birch with Lonely Law Partners here on behalf of the applicant. Also with me tonight.
Time, please.
Also
Excuse
on
me.
me tonight is Gordon Grubb with Grubb Ventures. Here just to answer any questions that the council may have. As a reminder, the purpose of this rezoning is to kind of build on the success of the first phase of the kind of a true mixed-use development at Glenwood Place, where we already have 2 office buildings and 2 apartment buildings with ground floor retail and restaurants that are serving the residents and occupants of the development and the surrounding neighborhood. If we could go to the next slide, maybe the next slide. Yeah, perfect. So this rezoning permits additional height where appropriate along Glenwood Avenue in the area that is farthest from the nearby neighborhood and where views of the future buildings will be obscured by existing buildings and existing vegetation. At the last meeting in November, at the request of Councilor Knight, we deferred so that we could continue to work with the residents of the nearby neighborhood, particularly with regard to height, but also, to work on screening conditions for parking structures. During that time, we did further limit height to 5 stories and 10 stories closest to the properties along Alamance to our east. And even within that area that we are maintaining a maximum of 12 stories, we have added a condition that said no more than 2 buildings in that area can be 10 stories or more. So ensuring kind of a, not all of that area will be developed with tall buildings. It'll be different heights with only maybe 2 in that 10 to 12 range up near Glenwood Avenue. So we appreciate the time that we were given by council, appreciate Councilor Knight working with us, and also appreciate the neighbors along Alamance, Buncombe, Transylvania in the neighborhood to the east for working with us over the last year, but in particular the last 2 weeks or so on these additional conditions. So as Mr. Annexation mentioned, cases consistent with the future land use map, urban form map, comprehensive plan, and we would ask for your approval of this case, but here to answer any questions council may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any council member have a question for the applicant? Okay, having said that, I will close the hearing. Do we have a motion on this? Councilmember Knight?
I'd like to put forward a motion, Madam Mayor. But before that, I'd like to make a brief statement. As to this rezoning, There was some concern about the height in the neighborhood. I appreciate Mr. Birch and Mr. Grubb working with me and the neighbors. And I believe we've got to a good place. The greatest height will be the farthest distance from any homes. And there will be blocked by a lot of trees and cover and canopy. And so appreciate them continuing to work on that the last couple of weeks, as well as working on parking, the aesthetics around parking, as we all know, and they've worked to make these parking decks, the facades that are going to go on them, so they will fit in and blend in as well as possible. But I really want to talk a little bit more about the larger development that's occurred at this location. As many of you know, I live in the neighborhood behind this development and have my day job office in one of the current older buildings, which I'm sitting in right now, that will be torn down for this next phase of development. When the developer, Gordon Grubb, and other partners of his first proposed this redevelopment, because that's really what it is, it's a redevelopment, I joined with some neighbors to work with the developers to make some changes to this proposal. One thing they did was slow down the development and put it into phases. They also reduced the maximum height of some of the buildings that they were planning. As I said, we didn't say it was our way or we were going to fight you to the death, nor did they. We worked with them, and I think they made the redevelopment happen and created more trust, not animosity, between the neighbors and the development team. It may have helped that Mr. Grubb is local and is immersed in the community. This development is already and will even become even more of a mixed-use development, a true mixed-use development, and a community, really. It will have apartments at different price points, commercial, retail, and restaurants, potentially a hotel. A business just opened called Ladyfingers, who many of you have heard about. They currently have an operation on Whitaker Mill Road that is on the first floor of the first phase of this redevelopment. It's basically a small grocery store or an urban style deli or convenience store. I'm very excited about it for this area and this community. Mayor Pro Tem Stewart and Councilor Melton, I think this is what we're talking about when we talk about the 15-minute city. There's a lot of residential of all types surrounding this redevelopment. And I'm not saying everyone's going to walk or bike from the adjoining neighborhoods, but they can. And if they do take a vehicle, it will be a very short ride. My point is, these type of redevelopments can happen all over the city if folks are willing to not look at it as only a win or lose and not with a NIMBY approach or attitude, but rather, how can we work together to make our community better, not just for ourselves, but for our neighbors and the other residents of the city who can and will access this type of redevelopment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the hearing is closed. Are you going to make a motion or have you made the motion?
Well, when you tell me to.
Come on.
I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Hey, do we have a second? Councilmember Melton has seconded. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, anyone opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Next, we have rezoning Z3921 Whitfield Road. Again, no one has signed up to speak in opposition.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to thank Hannah Reckow and John Annignos for pitching in with presenting the zoning cases tonight. I think the variety is good for all of us. Appreciate y'all being willing to hear from them. So we have, I think here come the slides. So this is a request to rezone. This is Z3921, a request to rezone just over 10 acres from R6 with conditions to R10 with conditions. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. The Planning Commission recommends approval, but there was a dissenting vote, and that was related to the condition about the cemetery on the site to be preserved. So this is down southeast of downtown, east of the Battle Bridge Rock Quarry intersection. A couple of views of the site. So the conditions here, they have limited themselves to single unit, 2-unit, multi-unit, and living and daycare. They've prohibited apartments. They're providing 10-foot wide buffer adjacent to one parcel, a 20-foot wide buffer adjacent to another, providing a fence along Lady Myrtle Lane, a parcel of there, and then limited their total units to 85, and then preserving the cemetery there with a documentary report and protective fence. And my understanding is the way that the Planning Commission member was concerned that the condition did allow for dedication and development of right-of-way in some portion of the cemetery, and there was concern with the Planning Commission about that. So there's the illustration of the buffers that are going to be provided by the condition. So you can see the 10-foot wide and the 20-foot wide buffer there and the fence. So the change here is a relatively modest shift in the number of residential units allowed because they have capped their total number, but they are get smaller setbacks for, well, actually comparable setbacks for detached and townhouse, but smaller lot size with that R10 base district. Again, consistent with the comprehensive plan, and Planning Commission does recommend approval. Applicant is available to answer your questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have before you open the public hearing.
Okay, do we have any questions for Bynum? Okay, then I am going to open the hearing. Believe we have somebody here to speak on behalf of the applicant.
Yes, good evening, Mayor Baldwin. This is Laura Good with Parker Poe, 301 Fayetteville Street, Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm here also with other members of the development team, and we do have a presentation that we are happy to share with the council. However, given the fact that there are no folks signed up to speak in opposition, I have spoken with Councilmember Branch as it is his district, and I did reach out to the council members. But again, we're happy to go through the presentation, or we're happy to just be here and answer any questions you have.
Let's leave it where we can ask you questions. Are there any questions for the applicant? No? Okay, if it's okay with you, Laura, I'm going to close the hearing.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, hearing's closed. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Branch?
Madam Mayor, thank you. And I want to thank the applicant for their work and the concerns. And I do know there was concern about the cemetery, and they've done work to ensure that it is preserved. There may be some questions about the street widening that may impact it. And they have put in a plan to address that as well. So with that being said, addressing the concern from the Planning Commission, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7th, 2021, containing the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
That is seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. All in favor, please raise your hands. Anyone opposed? Okay, clerk, that was unanimous. Thank you. Okay, next we have rezoning Z4021 on Louisburg Road.
Good evening, John Annexation again. This zoning case is Z-40-21. A site of just over 40 acres on the west side of Louisburg Road, south of Ligon Mill Road and Mitchell Mill Road. The request is for residential mixed use with a 4-story height, parking limited frontage, and conditions. It was consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan, and the Planning Commission voted to recommend approval. Next slide, please. There are conditions offered with the case that prohibit certain uses, limit the total number of dwelling units. Number 3 requires compliance with the stormwater floodplain regulations that were approved through text change TC-16-20, but which do not go into effect until April of 2022. So basically eliminating the option of permit choice for a development if a development plan is submitted prior to the effective date of TC-16-20. Additionally, landscaping is required along the street frontage where it is disturbed, and then a greenway connection is required with Louisburg Road to the existing greenway trail that passes along the west side of the site. If there is disturbance in that greenway easement, notice would be provided to the holders of that easement, which includes the city and the North Carolina Land and Water Fund, who provided a grant to purchase that easement in order to build the greenway in the first place. And then a final condition which was submitted after the Planning Commission review, which requires electric charging stations to serve 4 vehicles within the parking area of the site. Next slide, please. So you can see the site here is nestled in a curve of the Neuse River on the west side of Louisburg Road, and on the west side of the Neuse River in this area is the Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve. There is a Neuse River Greenway Trail, segment of the Neuse River Greenway Trail that passes all the way through the site and has a bridge across the Neuse River at the north end of the site. Otherwise, development in the area is largely residential with some commercial and civic uses around the intersection of Louisburg Road and Perry Creek Road. Next slide, please. A little closer look at the site, so largely wooded at this time. Next slide, please. This is the floodplain on the site. So the blue area is the floodway, which is completely undevelopable. The pink area that you see there is the 100-year floodplain, which according to TC-16-20, which would apply to this site regardless of when a development plan is submitted, would essentially prohibit development in the pink area as well. The purple area is not regulated. Next slide, please. This is the location of the existing greenway easement on the site. And so it corresponds largely with the floodplain, though the floodplain is a little bit wider in the northeastern portion of the site. Next slide, please. There is a requirement in the UDO that a development of this site would dedicate or reserve 150 feet of land on adjacent to the Neuse River, the bank of the Neuse River, to facilitate greenway trail management, and that would expand the greenway easement if it was accepted by the city in the area in the southwestern portion of the site. Next slide, please. And so this is a projection, obviously not up to engineering specifications, but a basic estimation of what that additional greenway reservation would be as required by the UDO, regardless of zoning conditions in the zoning case. Next slide, please. Here's the view from the road, as well as from the greenway trail. Next slide, please. Again, from the road. Next slide, please. So the proposed zoning would allow roughly a doubling of the number of dwelling units on the site, and of course additional height. The allowed height in residential 4 is 3 stories and 40 feet or 45 feet, depending on the building type. RX4 would allow up to 68 feet and 4-story development. Next slide, please. The future land use map calls for office and residential mixed use on this site in the areas outside of the floodplain. The area inside the floodplain is recommended for public parks and open space. Due to the regulations and greenway easements that apply to this site, it is found to be consistent with the future land use map. Next slide, please. It is inconsistent with the urban form map, which has a parkway corridor along Louisburg Road, which would suggest a landscaped area along Louisburg Road. The parking limited frontage that is requested does provide specific exemptions from tree conservation requirements along Louisburg Road. That is mitigated to some extent by the zoning condition for landscaping where land is disturbed, but not fully mitigated, and so the inconsistency remains. Next slide, please. Overall, consistent with the comprehensive plan and future land use map. Next slide, please. Inconsistency is largely related to the urban form map. Next slide, please. And next slide. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Sorry, Councilmember Cox.
Yes, could you go back to the list of conditions, please?
It's all the way at the beginning, the second slide. I'm sorry. Next slide, please. Yep, right there.
Okay, now condition 5 about the multi-use path. I think I read that would only happen if they were not required to build an ADA compliant path. Is that correct?
That is the way the condition is written. It specifies that it would not be required to be ADA compliant. The reasoning for that is that the area as it approaches the greenway is steeply sloped, and so may be difficult to construct a path or ramp that meets the slope percentage required by ADA accessibility requirements, or the alternative to, in order to be able to meet ADA requirements, would be a sort of switchback passing along the slope and having a longer path. And so that would indicate additional disturbance of potentially floodplain and greenway, or not floodplain, but Neuse River adjacent areas and potentially the greenway easement. So basically, my understanding of the applicant's motive is to allow for a more direct but potentially more steeply sloped path.
Okay, but if we required, or there were federal requirements that required this to be ADA compliant, then they would not build it according to this. They would have the option of not building it according to this condition. And so my question is, under what circumstances would we not require ADA compliance for a multi-purpose path?
If it's offered voluntarily by a rezoning applicant, we would have the opportunity to do that. If it's a city-initiated project, or if it uses federal funding, or if it's a requirement of the UDO, a standard requirement of the UDO, in pretty much all those instances, ADA accessibility would be required. In this instance, because this is going above and beyond something that the city is requiring, my understanding is that it's really the applicant setting the standard, not the city or the federal government at that point.
Okay, so I guess I don't understand that. I was wondering if the city attorney could weigh in on this.
I have not been asked to look at the condition. I assume that someone from my office, perhaps David York, has done that. What he is saying is that because it's not a required path, it's not required by the UDO, it's not required by the city, and it's not using federal funds, that it does not have to be ADA compliant. Again, I have not looked at it closely. I do believe that that sounds reasonable, but we'd have to look at it a little closer to come back definitively about that, because I haven't looked at it.
Okay, I think in the future, when a condition is offered, that the entire condition should be presented to council, and so that these details can, people can be made aware of them. I mean, if I hadn't read through all of this and picked that up, it would have been missed. So I do think that in the future, when these presentations are made and the conditions are being presented, that detail needs to be included. I think it's important. I have a niece that uses a wheelchair. I'm very sensitive about the need for ADA compliant paths, and I'm disappointed that the developer would choose to find a way not to build a ADA compliant path.
Why don't we do this and ask the applicant during the hearing part about this? Okay. Do we have any other questions for staff? Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. So we've been getting a lot of emails that it seems to be some confusion, and I wonder if staff could help us clear this up. Is there any part of Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve being rezoned or changed, or any authorized development on the park property in front of us tonight?
No, the rezoning site is private property.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay, thank you. We have a number of people who have signed up to speak. My understanding is that there'll be a couple of spokespeople for those who are waiting to speak who are opposed. We'll get to that in a minute. First, I'm going to open the hearing, and I will ask to hear from the applicant. I believe that's Jennifer Ashton.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. This is Jennifer Ashton, Longleaf Law Partners. I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant, Buckingham Companies. I'm joined by our project engineers, Chris Bostick and Melissa Brand from Kimley Horn. They will be available to answer any questions. As staff stated, we are seeking to rezone the property from R4 to RX4 PLCU in order to build an apartment community. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. If we could get to slide 3, please. Next slide. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yep, one back. One back. Thank you. The property is located on the north side of Louisburg Road in between Ferry Creek Road and Ligon Mill Mitchell Mill Road. Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve is located across the Neuse River to our north. There are a good number of retail and office amenities nearby, with the closest shopping center being 1 mile from our site. And our site is also very close to the Wake Tech North campus. Next slide, please. As you can see from the city's zoning map, there is a lot of single family in the area. There are not many apartment communities in the area. Adding apartments here would provide additional housing options for people looking to stay or relocate to the area. Next slide, please. The area in blue on the future land use map is showing an office and residential mixed use land use designation. As you'll see in future slides, our developable area is being voluntarily limited to the area in blue. The area in green on our site is all being preserved and will not be disturbed as part of this development. Some things to note about this future land use map designation. The change to office and residential mixed use was approved by council in 2013 after staff made the request. Previously, it was just office research, but by making this change, the property was opened up to higher density residential uses such as apartments. The office and residential mixed use designation states that it is applied to frontage lots along major streets like Louisburg Road, where low density residential uses such as single family are no longer appropriate. Finally, the future land use map recommends 4 stories in height for this site, which we are consistent with. Next slide, please. So what does our project bring to the table by way of conservation of land? As you can see on this slide, we are only proposing to develop 28% of our total acreage. The remainder of 72% is being left open for conservation and preservation and will not be disturbed. Next slide, please. So how is this conservation occurring? As Mr. Annexation mentioned, there are 18.39 acres of existing conservation and greenway easements on the site, which were acquired by the city in 2002 to 2003. These easements were set up specifically to buffer the preserve to our north and the Neuse River. They were also set aside for public recreation space. These easements are staying exactly the same. After taking what it needed, the city left the remainder of our site available for development. However, we're voluntarily conserving even more land than what the city set aside. Can we go to slide 9, please? Perfect, thank you. The area in light blue on this slide represents the floodway fringe. It totals about 11.21 acres outside of the existing easement areas. Can we go back 1 slide? Thank you. Under current UDO requirements, we can develop up to 50% of this fringe area today. So we can develop 5.6 acres by right today as part of a single family development. As part of this rezoning application, we are voluntarily agreeing to not build in that 5.6 acres and instead pull our development footprint to the west. There are multiple benefits to having this 5.6 acres preserved today. We're providing extra buffer to the preserve, the river, and the wetland located adjacent to the Greenway Trail Bridge to our east. And also, we're enhancing water quality standards over and above what is currently required by city code. Now, stormwater will be studied at the site planning phase, but some things are certain today. 1, we're required to meet all stormwater and water quality standards at our point of discharge right now. But by providing this extra 5.6 acres today, that allows us to give extra filtration of nitrates and slow down the velocity of water as it heads towards the river, which enhances the water quality that we are already required to provide. So this is bonus. Next slide, please. Now, in order to preserve this extra 5.6 acres that we can build by right today and get all those stormwater and water quality benefits, our developable footprint is being squeezed to the west. This requires us to move our development closer to Louisburg Road. Now, as Mr. Annexation mentioned, the urban format does recommend a parkway frontage here, which is a 50-foot buffer along the length of our frontage. We are meeting parkway frontage for 800 feet, but for 1,300 feet, which is the area in yellow, we will not. That area will be disturbed. However, as part of our zoning conditions, we are going to be replanting a 20-foot buffer along that area in yellow, the frontage. The replanting requirements are based off the city's C2 protective yard standards, which is not minimal by any means. There will be 52 shade trees replanted in this buffer. Overall, only 0.89 acres is not being replanted along the frontage, while 5.6 acres is being preserved in the floodway fringe. We believe we are preserving trees in the right place in order to maximize wetland protection and water quality benefits. Next slide, please. Or actually, can we go to slide 13? Perfect, thank you. I also want to talk about sightlines. There has been a concern raised that our buildings will be visible from the park. This sightline shows that that is just not going to happen. Given the distance between our site and the open areas in the park and the existing dense foliage, our buildings will not be visible. If we can go to slide 15, please. The same is true if you're on the Greenway Trail Bridge and looking back at our site, you will not be able to see our buildings. While we're on this slide, I do want to take a moment to address light. Some concerns were raised that lights from our buildings would affect birds and insects in the preserve. First and foremost, the city has acquired 18+ acres on our property already to buffer the preserve, and we are providing an additional 5.6 acres towards this purpose. So we think adequate buffers for light have already been put in place. With that being said, I have discussed this with our project engineers, and our exterior lights on the rear of our building, the ones that are going to be facing the preserve, will only have a single sconce on individual patio units. Those sconces will be controlled by the unit's tenants, meaning they will not always be on. There will be no other exterior lighting on the rear of the buildings. This would be a very different story if single-family homes were constructed on site. Individual homeowners could install whatever they wanted on the rear of their homes, such as floodlights. Slide 17, please.
Jennifer, you have 1 minute left. So if you want to reserve any time, I would suggest.
Yes, I'll go ahead and reserve that minute. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. If we could go back to thank you. All right. Are there any questions for the applicant at this point? Councilmember Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. So I think I understood the explanation about the parkway versus the parking limited frontage. But I wonder if Jennifer could speak to that again, and also address traffic access off of Louisburg Road. How do we think that's going to be configured?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember. So the parkway frontage, we are required if we followed parkway frontage, we would be required to have a 50-foot buffer along our entire frontage. We are meeting that for 800 feet of our frontage, but there is 1,300 feet where we will only have a 20-foot buffer instead of a 50-foot buffer. We think that the trade-off of getting the 5.6 acres in the fringe is a good trade-off. We are going to be replanting a 20-foot buffer, but we're also preserving 5.6 acres of that floodway fringe area. By preserving in the 5.6 acres, we're able to protect the existing wetland, the river, and the preserve area, provide extra buffers to all three of those things. So that's why we're asking for that trade-off. To answer the question about traffic access off of Louisburg Road, there is an existing NCDOT project that is slated to begin in 2022-2023 to widen Louisburg Road from 6 lanes to 8 lanes. Traffic access will have to be discussed with NCDOT, but we believe as of right now, there will definitely be a right-in, right-out. What the left turn access is into the site as you're heading north, there may be like a temporary left turn in. That may change once that widening project occurs. I don't know about a left turn out north, not sure about that. But all of that would have to be coordinated with NCDOT.
Okay. Thank you. Any Councilmember Knight?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Ashton, as to the undeveloped part of your proposal portion of the property,
I believe you said that there's going to be a connection, I guess, through there from the developed portion to the greenway. Talk a little bit more about that. And also, is there going to be public access to that undeveloped portion of this parcel by the future residents of this development and or the public coming off possibly the greenway?
So I'll talk first about the multi-use path connection from Louisburg Road up north to the existing Greenway Trail, and this will address hopefully Councilmember Cox's question as well. Staff came to us during review of this rezoning case and asked us to provide a condition where we would install a multi-use path from Louisburg Road up to the existing Greenway Trail to the north of our site. There is not a connection off of Louisburg Road today. So staff thought with all of the roadway improvements that are coming in and all the new sidewalk installation that's going to be coming in, it made sense to add this new connection point from Louisburg to the existing Greenway Trail. As we took a look at where that multi-use path was going to be located, we have a lot of topography constraints with this site. As Mr. Annexation mentioned earlier, the site slopes down pretty dramatically as you head to the river, which is common when you have a river. But with that being said, to accommodate ADA standards on that connection all the way down would most likely result in some kind of ramp being created as you're approaching the river to the north. The issue we have with building a ramp in that area, one, we're going to have to cross into conservation easement territory. So we'd have to get permission from the state of North Carolina to do that. A ramp requires significant land disturbance, and we will be plunking down anchors into environmentally sensitive lands. The other major concern with building a ramp in that part of the site to the north is that we are going to be also building in floodway. So we have to meet certain FEMA standards that we don't know today that we can meet. For example, one FEMA standard is that you have to elevate the ramp to meet a 500-year flood level to make sure if there was a flood that the ramp wouldn't wash away. So with all of that being said, we had some conversations with staff about we are willing to build this path at your request, but we don't think we can commit to a ramp, an ADA accessible ramp for all those reasons I just stated. Staff informed us that they would rather have a connection, even if not ADA accessible all the way, than not have one at all. There are other ADA accessible points within the park where people can connect to the Greenway Trail today. One last thing on the Greenway Trail, the language that we're proposing about not complying with ADA when you're getting to that northern section of the site, that was taken from another rezoning case. It was Z4719, which was 4800 Raleigh Road. We copied that language directly. So that case had very similar circumstances to ours, where there were conservation easements and significant topography changes. So again, that case was approved by council, and so there is precedent for this type of thing in a similar situation. Councilmember Knight, your next question was public access to the undeveloped portion of the parcel. So when we say that this land to our east is going to be preserved, it's not being made available to the public except for those areas that are already within the conservation easements. So there is the existing Greenway Trail. In those easement areas, that will remain. We are not disturbing that, so the public will still have access to all of that Greenway Trail easement area. But for anything else that's just nature preserve, that will not be open to the public. It's also not going to be made readily available to residents of this site either. It is supposed to be intended for preservation. With that being said, I can't prevent people from maybe trespassing in that area, but it will not be encouraged.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I have approximately 50 people who have signed up to speak. Are there, as I was told, there will be several people speaking for the group. Could we identify who those folks are and get them on the line?
Mayor, we do know who they are. So I believe Lena is going to start out and there is a presentation too.
Okay, could we have name and address for the record, please?
I'm sorry, Wah Wong is starting first.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Wah Huang, 7401 Ebenezer Church Road, 27612, representing Capital Group of North Carolina Sierra Club, and Lena Galitano, who will represent Wake Audubon Society, will be speaking on behalf of the 58 people who signed up to speak in opposition to rezoning application Z4021. Next slide, please. I want to focus on the city's 2030 comprehensive plan and the commitment to sustainability. We assert Z4021 is inconsistent with the plan per the listed section on the slide. The UDO does not address impact on nature preserves in development process. There's still a need for holistic environmental review for Raleigh to consider the interdependent relationships of environmental stewardship, economic strength, and social integrity envisioned in the plan. Next slide, please. On behalf of our members and supporters, Wake Audubon and Capital Group request that Council refer the rezoning case to the committee for further review in order to answer our concerns. Next slide, please. The red circle here is an approximation of the 1,000 feet radius for the second rezoning public notice by mail. Most of the circle covers Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve, the News River Greenway, and city property across Louisburg Road, thereby limiting community communication. Rezoning signs were posted at Louisburg Road, but no signs were posted along the Greenway or the entrance to Horseshoe Farm to notify those who use this park and the Greenway and is most impacted with rezoning by extension. In this case, informing neighbors in the 1,000 feet radius does not meet the intent of the public notice in rezoning cases. Next slide, please. Our organizations support affordable housing, especially given that there's currently an eviction crisis. The development does not address that need, and this is simply not the right location for density. Increasing density will impact this environmentally sensitive area while still not addressing housing concerns at large. Next slide, please. Density is most successful along public transit corridors. The development site is not shown on this map, but is located near the top right corner. There is no nearby bus service or walkability to services. Residents will be mostly car dependent. Establishing a bus rapid transit may address this concern, but it still does not address the impact to wildlife and their habitat. Next slide, please. Louisburg Road is designated a parkway corridor and is identified as a gateway focus area. The rezoning requests an exception to the 50-feet parkway corridor designation to be replaced with a 20-foot strip of small trees and shrubs with park-limited frontage. Maintaining the parkway corridor will protect the viewscape and provide a much-needed buffer. Next slide, please. The UDO requires transition and buffer development in neighborhood. There is no language in the UDO for general transition to our most valuable natural resources and heritage. As a result, oversight of the impact on the natural heritage natural area in Horseshoe was not addressed. Greenway connectivity in the proposal does not address these impacts. An interdepartmental staff review for impacts to the Greenway and Horseshoe would be appropriate to establish a holistic review for this case. Next slide, please. If approved, the rezoning along News River and Greenway will be precedent setting for development damaging to lands along the News River and other nature preserves in Raleigh. Development of adjoining properties along Louisburg Road will be even more damaging to the natural heritage natural area surrounding Horseshoe. As mentioned by previous speakers, the Raleigh people like their park. So with that, I'll turn over to Lena Galitano of Wake Audubon Society. And next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Wah. I am Linda Galatano. My address is 2907 Hostetler Street, Raleigh. Stormwater is a major concern due to the topography of the site. Data from the RDU weather station indicates heavy precipitation events have increased by 80% in the past 30 years. The UDO addresses stormwater management. With the increase in amount and frequency of rain events and the unknowns of climate change, is the UDO adequate to address managing for the future in this sensitive area? Pollutants combined with impervious surfaces from the proposed 375 dwelling units is an issue that we believe deserves additional investigation.
Well,
Next.
right now there's 38.
Next slide, please. Both Horseshoe and the building site are approximately 220 feet in elevation, raising concerns about light trespass and viewscape. Light trespass from the hilltop will negatively impact wildlife species shown here in Horseshoe's floodplain forest, even with downward-facing light fixtures. Four-story buildings up to 80 feet may also be visible from Horseshoe's meadow. The viewscape along the Greenway and Horseshoe's River Walk Trail will be forever changed and reduce the nature experiences we currently enjoy. Next slide. Horseshoe will understandably see an increase from visitors and their pets. For the animals that call Horseshoe home, it will negatively impact their habitat with litter and, yes, dog poop. Without a full-time preserve manager, there will be more litter and dogs off leash. Next slide. At a virtual meeting with the applicant, we asked about a dog park and native plants. A dog park may minimize the impact to Horseshoe, although it may also increase the nutritional load and stormwater. We suggested native plants, but received pushback to follow the recommended trees in the city code. The city's recommended list has trees such as ginkgo that are not native and do not support wildlife. Next slide. For future development, we would like these conditions: parkway frontage at 50 feet, best practice stormwater infrastructure, bird-sensitive outside light fixtures using warmer color bulbs, native plants from a vetted plant list rather than the city's suggested trees. Next slide. Horseshoe Farm enjoys a regional reputation with visitors as far away as Greensboro and Durham, and as close as Youngsville and Wake Forest for a variety of activities. Next slide. Boy Scouts and homeschoolers have enjoyed seeing the success of their volunteer work. From the birdhouse with the bluebird poking out its head, and the monarchs from the seeds that the homeschoolers planted for butterfly weed. Next slide. But there is the wonder of the wetland pools for environmental education. 17-year-old Olivia, a nature instructor, writes that conservation is something I'm deeply passionate about. Environmental buffers provide a sustainable habitat, and by activating this rezoning proposal, this buffer will be diminished, disrupting the habitat. I love visiting Horseshoe and would hate to see development sitting, in a sense, right on top of Horseshoe. It wouldn't be the same. Horseshoe provides a nature escape away from the hustle and bustle of the busy Raleigh area. Next slide. Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve is far too important for a rezoning decision without addressing the concerns we've raised. It has been called an ecological treasure and provides green spaces for our mental, physical, and spiritual health. Sierra Club and Wake Audubon members believe there needs to be further study in advance of a rezoning.
Lena, I'm sorry, your time is up. I could do one of two things. If you'd like to finish, I could add a minute to your time and then a minute to the applicant's time. What is your preference?
I'll let you add a minute to mine.
Okay, and it just requires that I add a minute to theirs as well.
I understand.
Okay, all right, if you'd like to complete that.
Okay, so I would like to go back and say this has been called an ecological treasure. Sierra Club and Wake Audubon members believe there needs to be further study in advance of a rezoning permit. We respectfully request referral to committee. I'm going to add some comments from some of our supporters. We need to be responsible stewards of the environment. And another comment, the natural system that exists now will be irreparably harmed by major development and was intended to be saved. Do not disturb this priceless asset to our community, and we endorse that statement wholeheartedly. Thank you for your time, and happy holidays, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. Happy holidays to you and everyone on the phone as well. The applicant has some time left. Is there anything that you would like to address that was brought up?
Yes, Mayor, and I'll try not to be duplicative of my prior statements. I'll address some new issues that were raised. One of the comments that was made was about the walkability of this site. Currently, there are very limited sidewalks on the northern side of Louisburg Road. However, this rezoning and this apartment community will allow for installation of about 2,100 new linear feet of sidewalks. Couple that with the NCDOT project installing sidewalks from Ligon Mill Road all the way to Perry Creek, this area is about to become a whole lot more walkable, which will connect people to existing retail and office amenities and also to Wake Tech's North Campus. The stormwater, somebody mentioned that it is a major concern, and that is the UDO adequate? As an applicant, we can only go off of what the UDO says today, not on what it could be in the future. That's an impossible standard for us to meet. And we do believe by providing this extra 5.6 acres of preserve area that we are enhancing water quality for this site. There was also another comment that there will be too many people and dogs and too much litter if this project goes in. One thing that I think is very important not to miss is that we are trying to locate density near existing recreational amenities. So people are able to recreate without having to go in their cars and drive somewhere. This helps reduce vehicle miles traveled and helps reduce the project's carbon footprint. And I don't want anyone to assume just because someone's an apartment dweller that they're somehow going to be a litter bug. I think that's kind of an unfair assumption to make. And then also I do want to hit on the native plants. In my conversations with Audubon, they did ask if we would be able to plant native plant species along our frontage. I told them that that is something that we are intending to do. However, there is a very large existing utility easement with existing power lines along that frontage. And there may be points where we are, yes.
I'm sorry, your time has
That's okay.
run out.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Buffkin.
Mayor, I had a particular interest in that utility easement issue. Could I maybe in a question get Ms. Ashton to finish up that explanation about the frontage?
If you will ask the question, yes.
Ms. Ashton, could you give me some more detail about the utility easement and the frontage there that you were just speaking to?
Absolutely. There's an existing power line easement with existing power lines that runs a good length of our frontage. So although we would like to plant native species where possible, there may be moments where those native species, just given their height, would conflict with the existing power lines. So what I told Audubon is there may be portions of our frontage where we cannot plant native species due to height. The city does have a list of what they call locally adapted trees, which some of those locally adapted species are shorter in height and may be more appropriate adjacent to existing utility poles. So I did not push back on them. I was just stating the realities of our site.
Okay.
Thank you.
Could I get clarification on something related to what could be built there now versus what the conditions hold? So what I believe I heard is you will not build at 5.6 acres and provide that extra buffer. Currently, what is the rule? Like if somebody were to build by right now, how much of that land could they use?
Currently, by right, if we were to build a single-family development today or a townhome development, we could build up to 50% of that floodway fringe. So there could be development in that 5.6 acres. So as part of this rezoning, we are voluntarily agreeing not to build there. So that is a benefit of this rezoning case, to protect that entire floodway and floodplain area.
Okay. I see that staff had come up to address that question. I'll just ask if that is your understanding as well.
Yes, the current regulation is that up to 50% of the horizontal area of the 100-year floodplain may be filled to facilitate development. That would change next April with the effective date of TC 1620. And so the applicant has agreed to follow TC 1620, even if they submit a development plan prior to that effective date.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any additional questions? Councilmember Cox.
Yes, regarding that 5 acres, we're talking about 50% of 5 acres, is that correct?
No, we're actually talking 50% of 11.21 acres. That's how I get the 5.6. So the floodway fringe that exists outside of those conservation easements today is 11.21 acres. We can build by right up to 50% of that. That's where the 5.6 acres comes from.
Okay, okay.
Thank you. Any additional questions? That said, no additional questions. I'm going to close the hearing. Councilmember Cox.
This property is in my district. However, I feel that this is bigger than my district because of the Neuse River, the surrounding wetlands, and Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve being adjacent. And as I understand it, that under current zoning, because of the changes that have been made to R4 to allow increased density, according to a memo I got from Patrick Young, up to 171 units could be built under current zoning. And but one of the key differences is that the heights would be restricted to about 45 feet rather than going as high as 80 feet, 68 to 80 feet. If you look at the topographical maps, Horseshoe Farm and this property are at the same elevation. And if you do the trigonometry, then what is being proposed would go right to the tops and above the tops of the tree line as viewed from the center of Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve. So it's my opinion that without further discussion, that these buildings would be visible from Horseshoe Farm Park. The cutoff lights, even though they direct light down and towards the buildings, there's always light reflected from surfaces, whether it's parking surfaces or building surfaces or the tops of automobiles. So that light will reflect up and into the air. And I'm convinced, having spent 8 years working at Eastman Kodak Company, and I work in the area of image acquisition currently, that light would be visible from Horseshoe Farm Park as an ambient glow at night. I do think we need to have more discussion about the impact of that light on the wildlife in the area. And I think we need to have more discussion, given the intensity of what's being proposed, about stormwater runoff and its impact on species in the wetlands and the Neuse River. I read a report from the state of Maryland indicating that such runoff can kill off species in adjacent rivers. And I think that needs to be looked at. I think there could be good development here. It doesn't necessarily have to be under current zoning. I think that the Sierra Club and the Audubon Society's request to send this committee for further discussion is a reasonable request, and that's what I would support. I would not support the rezoning as it is going forward. And as I say, this is a larger issue. I understand there's an online petition with 800 people have signed. We received a lot of postcards. A lot of people signed up at this hearing. So there is widespread interest in this case. And I think we can reach a good outcome if we're willing to have the discussion. But I will leave it up to others on council to decide what they want to do. Because obviously, for the past 2 years, I've been in minority on this council.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I have spent, oh, it's okay. I've spent a considerable amount of time on this one, in part because of the outreach of some of our local environmental groups and the proximity to Horseshoe Farm Park, but mostly because of the incredible amount of property on this site that's in the floodplain. And as my fellow council members know, that is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's why we have the text change to not develop in the floodplain. And so that issue alone, what can be developed now by right is 50% of those 11 acres versus what this rezoning is proposing, which is no development at all in the floodplain, which will provide the greatest benefit to all of the concerns we heard tonight about wildlife and environment and stormwater and water quality and water quantity. And so for those reasons, am I going to be supporting that we approve this case as is tonight. The other thing I want to highlight is that when Horseshoe Farm Preserve became a preserve, when the city purchased that and made it a preserve, made it a park, they did so with the foresight of purchasing those additional 18 acres on this piece of property. There has been over 20 years of this plan in the making to make sure that that preserve is protected. And so now we have a chance to get additional protection with this rezoning for the preserve, but also for the Neuse River. And so I hope my fellow council members will take that into account as we move forward. But at the right time, Mayor, I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay, Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for those comments, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. I've also taken a special interest in this case, primarily because of Horseshoe Farm Park. I was on the Parks Board when there was a lot of impassioned discussion about Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve and what would be there and what wouldn't. And I've had some folks from my district reach out to me about the environmental concerns, and I've given some careful study to it. And on balance, I think development under this conservation plan and avoiding the floodplain is actually going to be better for the environment than if this parcel was developed. And with the Neuse River and the greenway and the buffer and the setback and all the vegetation between, I see a loose connection with environmental harm to the nature preserve. And I'd be reluctant to support a case if I thought there was going to be harm to a special place like Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve. And then I come to a question that I don't think has been raised at all tonight, and that's what would we tell these 375 families that could move into this place with close access to great educational opportunities at Wake Tech, ready access to downtown, good access to 540. This is a pretty good location to live. And on top of that, they get the benefit of being able to walk out their front yard, or front door rather, and get on our greenways, access the Neuse River Trail, bike to Anderson Point Park and beyond, or take a short stroll to one of the most beautiful nature preserves that I've, in an urban setting at least, that I've ever been in. So at the appropriate time, I'm going to be prepared to second Councilmember Stewart's motion to approve the case.
Okay, thank you. I have Councilmember Knight and then Councilmember Ford.
Yeah, I just, Madam Mayor, I have a question for Councilor Cox, please. Councilor Cox, I just wanted to ask your comments. It is in your district. To be clear, would you support the current zoning by right then that would allow, I think you said 171 single-family detached homes and being able to be built much further into the floodplain and into the preserved area? So would you support that current zoning that is by right now?
Well, they're not just detached homes. As I understand it, it would have to be a combination of, it could be detached homes, it could be townhomes. We made changes to R4 zoning in order to allow that. I think this is why I want to send it to committee. I think we should have more discussion about this. And to understand better, my personal feeling and based on my understanding is that this less intense development, I mean, 375 units, we're looking at least 400 to maybe 700 automobiles on the site in order to accommodate the cars that people will need in order to make their auto-dependent trips versus 171 units that could be possible on this site. I think a less intense development with lower height would be better for the area, and it would be better for Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve, and it would be better for the Neuse River and the surrounding wetlands. I would like to have more discussion about this in committee, but you know, it's up to council as a whole to decide whether or not we will give ourselves a little bit more time to have more discussion.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fort.
Yes, yeah, I echo Councilmember Cox's sentiments, and I guess I'm looking at more from the standpoint of the amount of correspondence we received through emails, postcards, and you know, over 50 people signing up tonight to speak on the matter, even though, of course, all 50 didn't speak. I do think having an opportunity to give the community a chance to weigh in through having this being heard in the committee would be a good opportunity for community engagement on this particular rezoning case, just based on the amount of interest that's been generated by this case.
Councilmember Melton.
Struggled with whether I wanted to say anything about this case or not, and I appreciate Councilmember Stewart's comments and the time she spent. You know, we're getting emails from folks who think that this rezoning is to build on Horseshoe Farm Nature Preserve. Like, they think the rezoning is to rezone the park. And I think there's been a lot of misinformation that somehow has gotten out into the public about this case. And it's making people afraid. There is someone in my office who works in my law firm, came into my office, terribly upset because she read on a message board that there was going to be no stormwater controls, and that the nature preserve was going to be developed on, and all the trees were going to be cut. I mean, these are things that she saw on a message board. And so I think we have to sort of measure some of the emails and comments we're getting with the reality of what is being proposed. No, I'm on Google Maps right now. I zoomed out. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of single-family homes just as close to Horseshoe Nature Preserve on the north side of that nature preserve. There's North Raleigh Christian Academy closer to the Neuse River and Horseshoe than where this proposed site is. And all I see there are surface parking lots and some single family homes. And so what we have before us is a development proposal that's actually going to set aside more land for conservation than anybody could just go in right now and build by right. I'm looking at a pharmacy within walking distance. I'm looking at a food line. And you know, I struggle with this idea that when there's a proposal for apartments or townhomes or condos near a park, it's a crisis. But when it's single family homes, where we have less restrictions to preserve and make sure that things are protected, those seem to go through okay. I don't like this idea that folks who live in multifamily housing shouldn't be allowed to live near parks, and they shouldn't have access to amenities, or that they're going to litter at a higher rate than folks who live in single family homes. And so I think we have to be careful of the messaging that's getting out. This is affecting people. Someone I know was upset by misinformation. And the reality of it is I think this rezoning is going to offer greater protection than what's already there surrounding other parts of the nature preserve. I appreciate the time the applicant has spent with the community and with staff, and I'm going to support the rezoning.
Okay, thank you. I do not see any consensus on sending this to committee. And I would just like to say that something that Councilor Buffkin said really resonated with me, and that is the opportunity for 375 families to live near a park to be able to walk to that park, to be able to experience that park, and, you know, have their dogs walk with them. You know, I think that's a good thing. And we're always talking about, you know, that 10 minutes. You know, everybody should be 10, 15 minutes near a park. Well, this is an opportunity to put 375 families near one of the parks and have them enjoy that. So I will also be supporting this for the reasons cited, but also I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I hope that the presentation by staff tonight and the applicant help clear up some of the misinformation that has been spread. So, yes, Gail. Clerk.
I have to report to you for the record, you did receive a lot of emails through my office and they've all been forwarded to you.
Yep.
Will be a part of the record.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Stewart.
Yes, Mayor. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Has been seconded by Councilmember Buckton. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, opposed? Clerk, that was 2 opposed, Councilmember Fort and Councilmember Cox, the rest in favor. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who turned out tonight. Appreciate the input. Next, we have
Madam Mayor.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Real quick, one of the comments that was made was around the tree recommendation in our policy. I would just ask if staff can just look at that list. I don't know how often it's updated, but to see if there are any native types that could be used and where, so that can be added. I understand the power line infringement parts, and I'm not asking for this for next week or next month, but if there's just something that staff can have on their radar when they're reviewing things to look at that list, it would be appreciated.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have rezoning Z44, 6525 Battle Bridge Road.
Yes, ma'am. This is a request to rezone just under 32 acres from R4 to R10 with conditions. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall, but inconsistent with the future land use map. And Planning Commission does recommend approval. You can see this is located on the north side of Battle Bridge. So this is actually not too far away from that Whitfield Road case that we looked at earlier this evening. A couple of views of the site. The conditions here require dedication of greenway shown in the Capital Greenway Corridor Master Plan, a limit of 200 dwelling units, some prohibitions on land uses. There's a provision here for affordability for senior residents with income at 80% or less of the local area median income, and they're providing that for a 40-year period, and that the consistent with the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, and then limiting height on the site to 2 stories and 40 feet, which is less than what would be allowed by the base district. So the actual effective number of units is going down here, but the units per acre is going up and your setbacks are going down. There are a lot of material here that we look at with the Planning Commission that you all don't usually see. Again, this is inconsistent with the future land use map. And so a change here, a number of consistent policies, inconsistent with the future land use map, and also that zoning of annexed lands. We touched on that policy a little bit earlier this evening about the priority of annexation. Planning Commission does recommend approval, and the change in the future land use map that would be adopted if you approve the zoning case is that the future land use map would be amended from low density residential to moderate density residential. Again, applicant available to answer questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have before you open the public hearing.
Okay, do we have any questions of staff? Okay, I am going to open the public hearing then. Just a reminder, no one has signed up in opposition. I have 3 people signed up in support. Who is representing the applicant?
Mayor, I believe Jerry Eatman is.
Okay, Mr. Eatman?
Jerry, are you there? Mayor, we will try Jim Eatman.
Good evening, council members. My name is Jim Eatman. I'm with the law firm Lynch and Eatman in Raleigh, and as noted, another attorney in our firm, Jerry Eatman, was actually slated to make the presentation, but he may be having technological issues, but I'm happy to step in and proceed in his absence. So if we could go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Again, we're here on behalf of the applicant, East Carolina Community Development, Inc., or ECCDI for short. ECCDI is a North Carolina nonprofit corporation formed in 1995. It was formed with the mission of developing high-quality, affordable housing communities. To date, ECCDI has developed 23 affordable housing communities, 9 of which serve seniors 55 and over exclusively. Below on this slide, you'll see several pictures. This is from an existing development of the applicant. It's Camellia Court in Morehead City, North Carolina. We're showing you this because this is the design the developer intends to use at this site. It's a single-story quadplex design, so 4 units. That really resemble a large single-family home, more than the apartment style you see with a lot of senior living communities. If we could move to the next slide, please. As mentioned in the staff report, development of this property would be limited to affordable rental units for seniors 55 and older. This would be a deed restriction on the property for 40 years. And in terms of day-to-day enforcement, the developer will be using a management company to enforce this and ensure that only seniors 55 and older are living in the units. Residents' income must be 80% or less of area median income. That's a HUD determined number there on the area median income. Depending on the exact tax credit program the applicant goes through, this could be and may likely be actually a 60% or less area media income. But in any event, it would be at least 80% or less of area median income. It does apply to 100% of the units at this development. And if we could go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Under the current R4 zoning, up to 250 units could be constructed on this property. For this reason, and due to the strong demand for affordable senior housing in this traditionally underserved area of the city, the applicant initially proposed a limit of 260 units with the idea that this represented a very moderate increase in permitted density under the existing zoning. However, in the course of our 2 neighborhood meetings and other conversations with the neighbors, density was one of the neighbors' primary concerns. So in an effort to address those concerns, the applicant reduced the proposed density to a maximum of 200 units. This is a 20% reduction from the 250 units that would be permitted under the current zoning. And by reducing the maximum number of units to 200, We have also substantially mitigated any inconsistencies with the future land use map with respect to density. At a 200 unit maximum, this request has a density of 6.25 units per acre, which is very close to the density contemplated by the future land use map, which would be 6 units per acre. So this proposed rezoning would provide a transitioning density consistent with the city's land use policies, from lower density residential neighborhoods adjoining the site to the mixed use activity center and moderate density residential designated areas to the south of the site, one of which was discussed in an earlier matter on the agenda. I'd also just like to note quickly that another one of the main concerns we heard from the neighbors was that they were worried about high-rise apartments being constructed here overlooking the neighborhoods. And in response to this concern, the applicant has included that condition I referenced earlier, limiting the height of all buildings on the property to 2 stories or 40 feet. Again, with the intent of preserving a more residential character to the development, and again, using this single-story quadplex design we showed earlier. So with that, I'll reserve the rest of the time to answer any questions that the council members may have. And thank you for your time.
Could you repeat what the original suggestion was on number of units?
Yes, ma'am. The original proposed limit was a maximum of 260 units, and we have since reduced that to 200 units.
Okay. Any additional questions? All right, I am then going to close the hearing. Councilmember Branch.
Yeah, I want to thank the applicant for their work with the neighbors and also for their focus on a population that has been underserved across the city. I know you're working towards the tax credit as you're moving forward, and that will come to us later in spring of, well, early summer, late spring of 2022. So I look forward to seeing that application. Once again, it's good to see District C doing this job and its work as far as affordable housing. So I look forward to other districts doing the same. But with that said, Mayor, if no one else has any questions, I'll go ahead and make the motion.
Yeah, I have to say I'm disappointed, quite frankly, that we are getting 60 less units of senior housing, which we desperately need. I'm not going to vote against it for that reason, but that's very concerning to me. So I just needed to get that off my chest and let that be known. Please.
Definitely, Mayor, I could tell.
Yep, please go ahead with your motion.
I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda items under recommended action. This approval is also deemed an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Okay. Do you have a second? Council, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart has seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? No, the motion is unanimous, clerk. Thank you. Next, we have rezoning Z4921, Kyle Drive and Buffalo Road. No one has signed up to speak in opposition on this.
Good evening again, John Anagnos from Planning and Development. This is zoning case Z-49-21, over 200 acres on the north side of Buffalo Road, south of I-540, and abutting the Neuse River on its west side. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, and the Planning Commission recommended approval. Next slide, please. This is a very large site and extends a great distance from east to west, almost reaching Louisburg Road at its western extent. Next slide, please. this exhibit shows the proposed rezoning districts, or proposed zoning districts for this case. So a mix of commercial mixed use with a 3-story height, residential mixed use with a 4-story height, and residential 10. You'll note a green line along the southern boundary of a portion of the site. That indicates where a zoning condition prohibits the apartment building type. Next slide, please. So here are the zoning conditions. There are maximum numbers of dwelling units allowed in the residential 10 and residential mixed use portions of the site. Additionally, those portions each have a specified minimum amount of open area in which there must be also some form of active recreation. There are certain uses prohibited in the commercial mixed use district, and then the prohibition on apartments that I mentioned a moment ago. Next slide, please. In addition to those conditions, there is a multi-use path required to connect from the Neuse River to an extension of Buffalo Road, which would extend north to meet Perry Creek Road, where it would cross I-540, and then a fence required along the southern boundary of the commercial mixed-use area, where it abuts an adjacent office mixed-use district that is currently being developed with townhouses, and then along that same boundary adjacent to the townhouse development, a 50-foot setback for eating establishment uses. Next slide, please. So this is actually a reduction in the total amount of development that would be allowed on this site, particularly for residential development, a reduction of over half. And next slide, please. Here you can see the future land use map. This is somewhat an unusual analysis of the future land use map in that the proposed zoning districts do not exactly align with the existing designations on the future land use map. Those designations emanate from the existing zoning. They basically correspond directly to the existing zoning districts, the boundaries of them. And so based on that understanding and the fact that the overall combination of uses and transition of uses proposed in the rezoning request are similar to what's allowed in the existing uses as well as what's recommended by this future land use map set of designations, it is consistent with the future land use map. Next slide, please. Consistent with the urban format because of the retention of the special highway overlay district, which would require planting areas or tree conservation along I-540. Next slide, please. A number of consistent policies related to mixed-use development, providing an integration of land use. Next slide, please. Inconsistent policies related to the potential for some commercial uses in the commercial mixed-use district, fairly close to the townhouse development in the office mixed-use district to the south. Additionally, no land set aside for public facilities considering the extensive size and potential build out of the site could be foreseeable to need public safety or school facilities here. But those policies related to public facilities are not strongly weighted in this case because of the significant reduction in potential build out. So legally difficult for us to emphasize policies calling for proportionate amount of public space when the amount of development is being decreased. Next slide, please. Planning Commission recommended approval, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for staff? Okay. Hearing none, I will open the hearing. I believe Michael Birch is on the line for the applicant. Again, no one has signed up in opposition.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. And if possible, from a presentation standpoint, John, I don't know if you're able to control the presentation, if you're able to put your slide back up that shows the street plan. While you're doing that, I'll just say, again, Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners here on behalf of the applicant. We also have a few others who are available if there are any questions. But primary purpose of this rezoning is really to bring all of this property under a single rezoning case with much clearer conditions that also take into account all of the city's new standards that have changed since these properties were last rezoned back in 1991 and 2007. At the same time, this case maintains an appropriate density, which allows for the full range of housing types, single family, townhomes, apartments, while at the same time acknowledging the concerns about traffic in this area that you all are well aware of, given the number of cases in the kind of the Buffalo Road area over the last few years. So to the point of kind of the transportation and traffic impacts, in addition to kind of lowering the overall intensity, this property plays a crucial role in facilitating much needed transportation improvements. In particular, this project will have to dedicate right-of-way and construct the extension and realignment of Buffalo Road and Spring Forest Road. And then also this property, development of this property will greatly enhance the interconnectivity in the area. Right now, the Cardinal Grove subdivision and Stone Ridge subdivision to the south of this project, their only way out is to Buffalo Road and to Cardinal Grove Road, which again causes traffic impacts on those roads. The development of this subdivision will create that interconnectivity and will provide for a much better distribution of trips, even in the existing subdivisions. Perfect. Thanks for putting that on. But as you can see, this property is kind of instrumental and kind of the first domino or primary domino that needs to fall in order for these significant transportation improvements to be made. And so this will be done as part of the proposed development. So in addition to contributing to the transportation solution, this rezoning is also providing large active recreation areas plus additional open space areas, as well as a public multi-use path connection between Buffalo Road extension and the Neuse River Greenway Trail. Again, that will be a public multi-use path connecting the sidewalk in Buffalo Road to the Neuse River Greenway. And I want to note that this property owner has already provided to the city over 33 acres towards the Greenway area, about 17.8 acres on the north side of 540 and over 15 acres on the south side of 540. That was provided to the city in around the 2002 time period. And then, as mentioned by staff, we've added a number of conditions that have enhanced transitions, particularly with regard to building type adjacent to the existing single-family homes in response to comments from our neighbors to the south. But we did not have anybody speak in opposition to the case at Planning Commission, unanimous recommendation at Planning Commission, and a case that's consistent with the comprehensive plan, urban form map, future land use map, and compatible with the surrounding area. And so we would appreciate your support tonight, but here to answer any questions that council may have.
Hey, do we have any questions of Michael? Councilmember Knight?
Hey, thank you, Madam Mayor. Is there any retail or commercial uses proposed within this development?
Yes, Councilor Knight. Yes, sir. So we have a portion of the rezoning area that is zoned CX3, community mixed use, that allows for both office and retail uses. And that is located near the intersection or the planned intersection of, the future Buffalo Road and Spring Forest intersection.
Great, thank you.
He got you on that one, Councilmember Knight.
I was hoping so, but I didn't see it. So I'm glad he showed me the way.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Cox?
Yes, this one is also in my district, and so I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Do we have a second? Mayor Pro Tem Stewart has seconded. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, anyone opposed? Okay, that was unanimous, clerk. Thank you. Next, we have rezoning Z5521 Forestville Road and Taylor Drive.
Yes, ma'am. This is just over 4 acres at the intersection of Forestville Road and Taylor Oaks Drive. The request is to go from R4 to R6 with conditions. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, and the Planning Commission did recommend approval. Aerial view of the site here for you. You can see there's a single residential dwelling unit there, a couple of views of the site. So they have prohibited apartment buildings and limited total development to 25 units. The current zoning would allow 15 detached units, more with the attached or duplex building type. An increase in detached entitlement, but a decrease in entitlement overall. And rezoning also would reduce the setbacks across every dimension. So consistent with the plan overall, inconsistent with that zoning for housing policy, we'd like to see the number of entitled units increase with a rezoning to be consistent with this policy, so not hitting the mark there. But Planning Commission does recommend approval. Applicant is here to answer questions, as am I. I don't believe anybody has signed up to speak for this. What can I answer before you open the public hearing?
Do we have any questions for Bynum? Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing. Again, no one has signed up to speak in opposition. Molly Stewart is here on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you, Mayor Baldwin and councilors. Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group. I'll just briefly note that we did have a neighborhood meeting for this request. 4 people attended that meeting. And the interest of that group that attended was more in the new housing availability. When will these units be ready? What will the interior units, of the units be like? There was no opposition expressed at that meeting in response to this modest rezoning request. Next slide, please. And here I just wanted to point out the Wake Crossroads small area plan. These parcels are included within the boundary of that plan, but without clear guidance. We've kind of taken it on ourselves to provide that transitional use between the small neighborhood commercial use, providing more housing to support those businesses, and then stepping down to the surrounding neighborhood through our modest rezoning request. And I'll reserve the rest of my time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions for Molly? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to close the hearing. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Cox?
I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action. And I think we need music for this at some point. So.
That has been seconded by Councilor Melton. We'll see if we can make that happen. City Manager, you on that? Okay. All in favor, please raise your hands. Anyone opposed? That is unanimous, Clerk. Thank you. Next, we have text change TCZ 421, 1801 ACC Boulevard. Again, no one has signed up in opposition.
That's right. That's right. So this is 8001 ACC Boulevard. This is a request to amend the zoning conditions that are currently in place on the property. It's just under 7 acres. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. It's flagged as inconsistent with the future land use map. I would just note that the current zoning is inconsistent with the future land use map. So inconsistency with the plan is not changing as a result of the request. Just we are obligated to acknowledge it to you. And the Planning Commission does recommend approval. So this is the northwest corner of T.W. Alexander and ACC Boulevard out in the Briar Creek area. That's a relatively new shopping center to the west there that has a Harris Teeter in it. A couple of views of the site. So they're changing the zoning conditions. They're not changing the zoning map. And so what they have done is altered the prohibited uses. So they're now prohibiting adult establishment, but allowing hotel and office. And then they're altering the development intensities allowed by the zoning conditions. So they are adding a use, which is 350 dwelling units and 40,000 square feet of commercial use as one of the menu. So they can do one of these three things, but not all of them. And then they also have added the proviso that those limits apply to principal use only, not accessory use. And they are providing a pedestrian entrance facing ACC Boulevard as a requirement. So the entitlement isn't the nuts and bolts. The quantity of the entitlement isn't really changing. It's more the nature of the entitlement. Again, inconsistent with the future land use map designation, which is already the case for the zoning that's in place. But the text change to zoning conditions will prompt an amendment to the map if you approve the zoning case. So this would change from office and residential mixed use to community mixed use. Planning Commission does recommend approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have before you open the public hearing.
Okay. Any questions of Bynum? Okay. I am going to open the public hearing. I believe we have Worth Mills here representing the applicant.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and members of council. This is Worth Mills with Longleaf Law Partners on behalf of the applicant. I'll keep my presentation short this evening and then answer any questions that council may have. Bynum did a great job of explaining what we're trying to do, and it is very straightforward. We wanted to add another use option, that being 350 dwelling units and 40,000 square feet of commercial uses on this 7-acre property. It's within the Briar Creek City Growth Center, and it is within the City of Raleigh Economic Development Priority Area. And we think that by allowing for a mix of residential and commercial uses, we'll be able to create a true mixed-use development in an area programmed for it, and with a development that is consistent with the other uses nearby. With that being said, I will close the presentation and make myself available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Worth? Councilmember Knight?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. From the drawing or design that I see, there's no surface parking, or I'm just seeing an image that's kind of placed down on the property, but is there any surface parking or is it all internalized?
Yeah, so the rendering that I sent this afternoon to you, Councilor Knight, that just shows a wrapped parking deck with all the parking internal. I cannot say for certain if there would be any surface parking for some of the retail uses, but I think it's safe to say that a large majority of the parking, if not all of it, would be contained within that parking deck.
Okay, great, thank you. And what percentage of the built space as compared to the whole parcel? Do you have that before you?
As far as a developable footprint as opposed to the entirety of the lot?
Not developable, but what you are going to develop, the footprint of that compared to the size of the parcel.
I don't have that information on hand, no, sir.
Okay, well, I appreciate the true mixed use style of this. I think that is great, and also the internalized parking, which is great too. Just try to save as many of those trees and the rest of the parcel as possible, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I am going to close the hearing then. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Knight?
Madam Mayor, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action. This approval is also deemed an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Okay, do we have a second? Councilmember Melton has seconded. All in favor? Okay, that was unanimous, clerk. Next, we have tiny homes.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. Justin Romero with Planning and Development. I'm also joined this evening by Jason Ruff, our Assistant Director in our Building and Safety Division. He can assist if there are any technical questions related to the North Carolina Building Code, as it did kind of factor heavily into the drafting of this ordinance. Some brief overview. This is authorized back in April of this year, and this text change was authorized with 3 specific components, including the allowance for tiny houses as permanent and accessory dwelling units, the elimination of parking requirements for tiny houses, and an allowance for tiny houses in cottage courts with a corresponding density bonus. So before getting into the structure of the text change itself, I wanted to just take a minute to talk about the construction methods and building typologies that were considered as part of this text change. There were 5 that were evaluated against criteria of whether they were designed to be both readily movable and allowable as a permanent dwelling. And when we say allowable as a permanent dwelling, we're referring to State Department of Insurance regulations. And I have a brief slide on each of these, but the takeaway from this slide here is that the manufactured home is the only typology that met both of those criteria. So recreational vehicles, or RVs, are licensed through the Department of Motor Vehicles. They are typically prefabricated and self-propelled or permanently towable. In North Carolina, they are allowable as a temporary dwelling, but not as a permanent dwelling. Park model RVs are what folks often think of when they think of tiny homes or movable tiny homes. They're constructed to what's called the ANSI 119.5 code. They are also prefabricated and permanently towable, but again, due to Department of Insurance rules, these are not allowable as permanent dwellings in North Carolina. Site-built homes are your typical 1- and 2-family homes. They're built to the North Carolina Residential Code. Obviously not constructed to be readily movable, and obviously allowable as permanent dwellings. Another note here is that the state limits municipalities' ability to impose aesthetic regulations on structures built to the 1- and 2-family building code, which includes site-built homes. Modular homes, just like site-built, are built to the residential code. They're typically just prefabricated and brought on site either in whole or in parts. For the purposes of zoning and building code, they're treated exactly the same as site-built structures. They're not constructed to be easily readily movable, and again are allowable as a permanent dwelling, and we are not allowed to impose aesthetic regulations on modular homes. Manufactured homes are labeled and certified through HUD, through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They are constructed to be readily movable. They are typically prefabricated. They are allowable as a permanent dwelling, and we can impose aesthetic regulations on these. An example of those would be foundation skirting requirements that we apply today. So in North Carolina, the only type of movable structure that's allowable as a permanent dwelling is the manufactured home. That is labeled and certified through HUD. In the Planning Commission's review and recommendation, they decided to recommend approval of the ordinance without this option. An original draft did include the allowance for tiny homes and ADUs to be constructed as manufactured homes, with some limited aesthetic rules applied to those as included. For example, a minimum roof pitch of 512, a minimum eave projection of 10 inches, a requirement that exterior material be non-reflective, and foundation skirting requirements that matches existing code requirements for manufactured homes where they are allowable. The Planning Commission, both the Text Change Committee and the full Commission voted unanimously to remove the manufactured home option as part of that recommendation. They also asked for a broader comprehensive study on manufactured housing reform in total, to include topics like financing disclosures and consumer protection, predatory rent hikes and mitigation strategies, energy efficiency building standards, and expanding use and access as appropriate. So as part of their recommendation to remove the mobile home option, they cited several reasons, one being that manufactured homes are typically a depreciating asset, the difficulty in obtaining mortgage products for these types of houses, the fact that they are typically of substandard quality, at least in terms of energy efficiency and durability, and potential changes to the HUD code that may make this option more suitable or viable in the future. So onto the ordinance itself. Under today's rules, there is no regulatory prohibition on the construction of a tiny house. It would just have to be built to the 1 and 2 family building code, and then would have to adhere to all the underlying base zoning's dimensional criteria. So no outright prohibition, but due to the fact that you'd have to meet the same standards as site-built homes, as larger site-built homes, it makes it a less attractive option. So what the text change would do is create a new building type for tiny houses. It would limit the size of those to 600 square feet of gross floor area. I would also give them reduced lot and dimensional standards from the detached house. They would be allowable in all residential and mixed-use districts and all the same places where detached houses are permitted today. As part of a manufactured home development, they would be permitted in the manufactured housing district, and they would get a corresponding density bonus and reduction in the required open space. And there would also be a standard to allow tiny houses as part of cottage courts, and they would also receive a corresponding density bonus there and a reduction in the amount of courtyard space that's required. Here's a definition. Again, it's essentially limiting their floor area to 600 square feet. They can be on individual subdivided lots, or if as part of a cottage court, they could be on a single lot. And here's some examples of the dimensional criteria, lot area width and depth standards. In most cases, it's pretty consistently basically a 25% reduction in the requirements for detached houses, with the exception of lot width in R6 and R10. That was given even more of a reduction, just in order to allow typical lots in those districts that are often 2 times the minimum lot size, the ability to be subdivided for tiny houses. And you can see an example of that here. There are many R10 lots that are in the 50 by 150 foot range, and those would be permitted to be subdivided for 2 tiny house lots under the 25-foot minimum lot width standard. So as part of a manufactured home development, again, a 25% density bonus would be afforded to these, and a 25% reduction in outdoor open space. Again, manufactured home developments are only permitted in the manufactured housing district. For cottage courts, they would be afforded a 25% density bonus, 25% reduction in the required courtyard space. And then, not specific to tiny houses, there were some other minor changes to the cottage court standards. I won't go through them all, but these were just adjustments to make the cottage court a more attractive and improve its usability and viability as a development option. Building height would be limited to 26 feet as measured from post-development grade, 26 feet or 2 stories. And then finally, this slide just shows a list of standards that were altered to kind of unify and make consistent tiny houses and detached houses. So essentially, they would be treated exactly the same throughout the code. So that concludes my presentation. You do have 2 ordinances in front of you tonight, 2 options. Option 1 in your backup material is the Planning Commission recommendation. That does not include the option for manufactured houses to be used as tiny homes or tiny home accessory dwelling units. Option 2 was the original draft that went to the Planning Commission. It does allow for the manufactured housing type to be used for tiny homes. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Do we have any questions? So I have a couple of questions. First off, I just wanted to ask, I didn't see any illustrations of like a tiny home village. Would that not be allowed under these changes?
So, yes, ma'am. The tiny home village would be essentially the cottage court option. So they, you know, an assemblage of tiny houses on one parcel could be built as a cottage court, and under these rules, they would get a basically 25% bonus over what a cottage court could obtain today.
So I'm kind of distracted because you've disappeared and I don't know what's going on with the camera. So I was like,
I'm still here, I promise.
I'm sorry. There you go. Oh, now, okay. Yeah. Could you repeat that? I'm sorry. It's a little late,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
I get distracted. So anyhow.
Of course. So I think what typically would be thought of as a tiny home village would be constructed as a cottage court development. So a group of tiny houses could be, I'm floating away again, I'm sorry. A group of tiny houses could be built on a single lot as part of a I'm sorry. Okay. So you could construct a cottage court with a group of tiny houses, and those tiny houses could all be on the same lot, or they could all be on their own individual lots if one wanted to subdivide. Cottage court is available option today, and what's being proposed here is that if you were using tiny houses as part of a cottage court development, you would be able to have 25% more units than you can have today.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had has to do with container homes or modular homes, whatnot. That is included in this ordinance?
So I may refer to Jason Ruff here, but if you're talking about when we say modular homes are built to the North Carolina Residential Code. Those would be permitted. Manufactured homes or anything else would have to be built and certified by HUD. And so I don't know that a container would be able to be licensed by HUD as a manufactured home. But it would have to be, assuming you went with that option of the ordinance. Now, if you went with the Planning Commission recommendation, then certainly that would not be permitted.
Okay, I know that there are container homes built throughout the state. So again, that's just a way of curbing cost and making these more affordable. So just have a question about that.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I may ask our Assistant Director for Building and Safety, Jason Ruff, to speak a little more in detail on that. But I will say that there are at least one example in Raleigh of a container home. The issue, as Justin characterized it correctly, is that it has to meet all of the standards of a site-built home. So really the the cost curve getting bent is really limited because of the fact that the state requires that it meet all the conditions and requirements of a site-built home or a modular home. A lot of the advocates on this issue, we obviously interpreted and understood your intent to be a way of trying to bend the cost curve to allow accessibility for a lot more people, and obviously we share that goal. We worked with a lot of folks, advocates out west, and out west, their equivalents to the Department of Insurance and the State Building Code Council allowed for what I'll call kind of hybrids between a manufactured home and a site-built home, and that allowed, for example, additional insulation that significantly improved the durability and reduced the cost of heating and cooling the units. We don't have that option in North Carolina, so we really are limited to the typologies that Justin described. So I just wanted to spend a minute kind of emphasizing that. And if you want to know more about the container homes, I can ask Jason to speak to those.
Councilmember Melton.
I have a question, I guess, and then just some comments. There's no one at the podium. Should I just ask and then maybe the appropriate person? Okay.
There was someone at the podium. They had just disappeared.
The camera kept going. The Planning Commission recommendation to do a study on manufactured housing reform, and the topics they included: the financial disclosures, consumer protections, predatory rent hikes and mitigation strategies, energy efficient building standards. That doesn't seem like a lot of that is stuff that the city has control over. Maybe it is. Maybe we're allowed to do more than I think. I'm just confused if that is something we would have to advocate the General Assembly for, or how much of that do we actually control? I mean, basically, if we do a study on it, how much progress are we going to be able to make? How much of it do we have within our purview?
Yeah, Councilmember Pat Young, again, that's a great question. And I would say it's almost exclusively issues that we would need to get approval from the State Building Code Council, General Assembly, or Department of Insurance. So that you're correct that we do not really have the authority to make changes. I presume what the Planning Commission's intent was to build information for advocacy in those areas.
I support that recommendation, but I don't think we should be moving forward with this change without including manufactured homes. We don't have anybody signed up opposed today, but we did get, I would say, several emails in support, and I've read through them. One of them we got from AARP that supports doing this study and including manufactured homes in the ordinance, because the manufactured homes are really how, from what I've seen, folks are moving forward with tiny homes. And I'm concerned that if we pass this ordinance without the manufactured homes, that we're not really going to be accomplishing the goals that we set out to accomplish, which you said, and I agree, are bending the cost curve and allowing access. Most people are building tiny homes as manufactured homes, ADUs as manufactured homes. And if we're trying to reduce costs and increase housing options, I think we need the manufactured homes in there. I agree. I think we can do some of this other advocacy work that is being suggested by Planning Commission, but my preference is to move with option 2, which was the staff proposal that we have gotten emails in support of from groups like AARP and groups, I forget what they're called, but the tiny home community advocates all unanimously say that we should include manufactured homes. And so that's my recommendation. And so I think we can do both. I think we can do option 2, which was the staff proposal, and work on the Planning Commission recommendations on this advocacy work. But that's obviously, we're at the mercy of the General Assembly on that. And so I don't want to hold up progress for things that we may not be able to accomplish. So I'm supporting option 2.
Okay, let's hear from the public then. Are there any more questions? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. We have 11 people who have signed up. We have 8 minutes. So I'm going to ask everybody to try and keep their comments to about 30, 40 seconds. And I hate to ask that, but I want everybody to have a chance to be heard. So if we could start, who do we have on the line first, Beth?
There were 11 people signed up, and there are less than that right now. But we'll go in order that's on your list if you want, and I'll let you know when they're not here.
Well, could you tell me how many people are not there?
I want to say we might have half of the people here still.
Okay, so then I would say a minute per person, if you could keep it to that. And that will allow everybody to be heard. Okay, who would be our first person? Or do you want me to say the name and you can tell me if they're there?
Yep, that sounds great.
All right, Anna Barnes.
Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Barnes. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. I reside in 4709 Bandview Lane in Wake County. I'm currently operating a fundraiser, Tiny Homes for Tiny People, which is a fundraising opportunity to create a vital change in our community by raising awareness and eventually help single moms secure tiny homes. I was in an abusive marriage, and I had the inability to bounce back after navigating through that. I was a former resident to Raleigh during that time. Since that time, Raleigh has become an increasingly impossible place to live on the average single parent income. The affordable housing options are almost non-existent. In Wake County, there is a 2 to 3 year wait to be placed on a waiting list for housing, yet these issues seem to be easily dismissed as they seem to be ongoing. The community is eager and willing to help create alternative housing options to combat affordable housing issues. The problem here is that we can't progressively move forward with developments like tiny homes for tiny people due to the cap we have placed before us with limitations on tiny homes, and more specifically, tiny homes on wheels. On the surface, we're talking about tiny homes, but underneath that, we are really presenting a conversation to you about providing an alternative means for stabilization within our community. I support the slight progress being considered for tiny homes. However, why hold back our community from progressive developments that could be made by allowing legalized tiny homes without so many strings attached? These setbacks on tiny homes and tiny homes on wheels are hurting small families like mine. We are asking to make room for changes that could be made altogether with more flexibility for tiny homes on wheels. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Glenn Grutengood?
Glenn is not on the call.
Barbara Colt?
Also not on the call.
Jen Truman?
Good evening, y'all. You're going to hear me a little heated about this text change tonight. I had hope when we came to petition y'all after we heard such interest in tiny homes at the beginning of the year. I had hope that we would move the needle. With all respect to Pat Young and Ken Bowers, who have had many long conversations of me bending their ear, this text change does not go far enough. It essentially legalizes something that was already legal for newspaper brownie points. We can do better than this. We have to allow manufactured homes. The fact that the Planning Commission would even consider not allowing that, I think, is classist and ridiculous. As someone who was raised by multiple generations of people who have lived in manufactured homes proudly throughout the eastern and western part of our state, that's a typical way to afford a house. And I'll just say one last thing. The state allows you to live in an RV or a park model for up to 180 days out of the year. Raleigh does not. Until we're actually allowing what the state allows, then saying that the state is holding us back isn't true. We have to support this one. We have to include manufactured homes, but we can also do better than this. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Mary Galugli?
We do not have Mary on the call.
Lisa Regal?
Hi, I'm Lisa Regal with AARP North Carolina. Thank you, Councilman Melton, for advocating for some real changes in the ordinance so we can move this needle forward. Our research shows that most people want to stay in their homes in their community, but the housing stock doesn't accommodate their needs in various ways, including safety, affordability, and accessibility. Yes, we support that amendment to include tiny manufactured homes as tiny homes. We also support the study to look at how do we improve the construction and the ways that were mentioned. And in addition, we can suggest that they look at quality, safety, and aesthetics in that study. But one thing I did want to quickly mention is that we support integration of tiny homes as part of mainstream housing to be used as an affordable and alternative housing option for older adults. Our preference is for tiny homes to be established in the form of standalone homes rather than as part of tiny home parks, in order to avoid any segregation in relation to tiny home developments and to make sure tiny homes receive similar amenities and importance and are not considered an inferior housing option. And for that reason, at the end of that little ordinance change that was shown about the cottage courts, we'd like to add a little phrase that says, provided all efforts will be made to locate the series of tiny homes within close distance to public transit and other amenities that the residents of the tiny homes will require. I think that's all, but again, thank you for really looking at housing options and, to better support our growing and diverse population in Raleigh. And we hope that we can get an ordinance that will move the needle forward for these housing options. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Birch.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Michael Birch. Not speaking on behalf of any client tonight, although I've spoken with a number of clients interested in pursuing this option, but really only if manufactured housing manufactured homes are allowed as a tiny home and a tiny home accessory dwelling unit. And so I would encourage council to adopt option 2 for all the reasons that Councilor Melton and others have mentioned, that it really preserves the affordability of what we all want to be an affordable housing option. So again, would just encourage council to adopt option 2. Thanks.
Thank you. Chris Chrisman.
Chris is not on the call.
Carrie Ann Ball.
Also not on the call.
Peter Chacha.
Hey, Peter Hahi here, 1017
sorry.
Magnum Street. Oh, don't you worry. It won't be the first or the last time. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm not sure how many more I have behind me. I'm happy to come back to.
If you could do 1 minute, that would be great.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So I am in support of this text change. Although option 2 with the bear with me, the other type of housing, it doesn't go quite far enough when it comes to manufactured housing, which option 2 entails. I want you to do me a favor and go a little bit further than that. I would like to get this council to push city staff to expand on some of these things. If we were talking about the home that I live in right now, you would call it an RV, but I would be happy to show you the tour of my RV that is not an RV. There is ways to work around this. There are some options in regards to how we can make this actually possible. I'd love to continue that conversation and think outside the box. But thank you and for your time this evening.
Thank you, Peter. Suzanne Harris.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Suzanne Harris with the Home Builders Association of Raleigh-Wake County, 5580 Centerview Drive in Raleigh. Appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. I'll be quick. I think I have the last minute. Would like to speak in support of the tiny house text change. The manufactured housing aspect of it, I think, is something that the city council needs to consider. I can appreciate some of the concerns that were brought up by the Planning Commission and the Text Change Committee. However, I do agree with the comments that were made by previous speakers, and I think you'll be doing the city a disservice with all of the goals that you're trying to achieve if you don't consider that option as part of it. The 2 items that I'd like to bring up to your attention that are a little bit more specific, I think that honestly, the city could go further than doing this less than 600 square foot gross floor area, especially if some of these are being targeted towards aging adults. Perhaps looking at a 600 square foot pad. And the last thing, and I know you're cutting me off here. Hold on a second. The last thing is the ownership piece of the ADUs not being able to be transferred.
Okay, thank you.
You should look
Thank you, Suzanne. Happy holidays to you. Okay. I want to thank everybody for speaking up tonight. I am going to close the hearing. So I see a couple of hands, Councilmember Melton first, and then Councilmember Buffkin.
Two things. I sort of misread the public hearing comment list and thought no one was signed up. So I definitely would not have advocated that hard before we heard from the public. So I do apologize for that, but no one was signed up opposed. So that got twisted in my head. That said, I basically already made a motion for option 2. So at the appropriate time, I'm going to make that motion. As that comes as no surprise to anyone for all the comments we just heard as well.
Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for staff. We could get someone to the podium, please. Thank you, Justin. So I saw in the report that tiny houses would be permitted in all residential mixed-use districts where detached houses are permitted. In a subdivision or development that has restrictive covenants that, like, for example, would have a minimum of square footage requirement, or maybe even an overlay district that accomplished the same thing, which policy would prevail?
Yes, sir. So if a neighborhood had restrictive covenants that had minimum lot sizes or other standards, the neighborhood can certainly enforce those if they chose to do so. The city would not be involved in that at all.
Mayor, if I may, the second part of the question, sorry, I know it's getting late, Justin. What about overlay districts that have similar features of regulation? Would the overlay district continue to control?
If I can't think of any off the top of my head that exist in that fashion, but if there were an overlay district standard, it would control over the base zoning.
Thank you.
Hey, any other, Gail?
Again, you received a number of letters in support that have been forwarded to you and will be a part of the file. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Any other questions for staff? Okay, I'm just gonna say this. I've been working on this for 5 years, and this is not perfect, what's come before us, but I also don't believe in letting great be the enemy of good. This is a major step forward, and I will be happy to second your motion, Councilmember Melton. I also want to put, I don't know if Larry's still here, but Larry and I have been talking about tiny home community pilot program for literally 5 years. And once this is passed, I would really like our housing and neighborhood staff to start thinking about how we could move forward with that pilot program, a demonstration project that can show how this can be done. So that's what I have to say. I'm very excited for this moment. It shows tremendous progress. Like others have said, it probably doesn't go far enough, but let's not let great be the enemy of good. So, Councilmember Melton.
Real quick for the city attorney, I'm about to read this consistency statement, but it doesn't say option 1, option 2. So do I just read it and the intent is that it's option 2?
I think you need to say that you're going to read the consistency statement to adopt option 2 and then go ahead and read it to make sure it's clear. And that's the one that includes manufactured homes.
Yes. Okay. So I am about to read the consistency statement to adopt option 2 to include the manufactured homes, which was the staff recommendation. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning text amendment.
Second that. Would you like to add anything about the study to that motion?
And to for staff to come back to us with options on the study that was recommended by the Planning Commission.
Okay, so I second that. All in favor, please raise your hands. Anyone opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I want to thank the staff for moving forward on this, and I want to thank everybody who showed up tonight too, especially advocates for AARP, home builders. I will tell you, I've worked with a group that was about aging in place, and this was something of great interest to them. So I'm hoping that we can see some change soon, and just really excited about finally moving forward on this. So thank you. And City Manager, if you could deliver the message to Mr. Jarvis, I would really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, next we have TC 1421, breweries, wineries, distilleries, and cideries in CX. Again, no one has signed up in opposition. We have one person, Jen Truman, who's signed up in support.
Yes, ma'am. I should be able to give you an overview pretty briefly on this one. This is TC 1421. This was an external text change request. It was filed back in May of this year, authorized in August. And as the title states, it's proposing modifications to regulations for breweries, wineries, distilleries, and cideries to expand where those uses are permitted. So, there are several existing use standards in the code today for breweries and other similar types of uses. There is a prohibition on distribution in the downtown mixed-use district, and also another standard in the downtown mixed-use district that prohibits outdoor storage. What the proposed change would do would expand the districts where breweries are allowed. They're currently permitted in.
Madam Mayor, I'm having trouble hearing him. Thank you.
Hopefully this is a little better for you. I'll try and speak directly into
Yes,
the mic.
that's much better. Thank you.
Okay. So breweries are currently allowed in CX, IX, DX, and IH. They are permitted by right in IX and IH, and as a limited use in DX. What this text change would do would expand this use as a limited use in the CX district as well, and incorporate two new use standards to both the DX and CX districts. That would require breweries to include some type of accessory tasting room or restaurant or retail use that's open to the public, and place a limitation on the amount of product that is produced per year to 15,000 U.S. beer or cider barrels or 75,000 U.S. gallons of wine or spirit per year. And this is just a map of existing city zoning. So the maroon is obviously the DX. The purple, light purple is IH, darker purple is IX. The peachish color is the CX district, the affected area of this text change where these types of uses could potentially locate, provided they complied with those use standards we just went over. That concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. So how do we come up with the production limits? I assume there's some other standard that we used or something like that. Where's this number come from?
Yes, sir. That's a good question. It's a number that we worked with the applicant to come up with, and was consistent with research we did on other jurisdictions in the area. So we did some research on other municipalities in North Carolina, and it's a pretty consistent standard for microbrewery use.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilmember Knight?
I thought that might be a state requirement, but so I'm intrigued by why we want to limit this. to that number? Is it just a size, trying to keep it at a certain size of an operation?
Yeah, so it's trying to limit the scale of the operation so as not, the community mixed use district is a kind of, it's not as quite as intense as the industrial areas. So it's trying to limit an industrial scale macro brewer from locating in a CX zoned area.
Do we have any other questions from staff? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. My understanding is that Matt Paul is also on the line for the applicant. So if anybody has any questions, you can also address those to him. But as I said, no one has signed up in opposition. I'm going to ask Mac if he wants to say anything.
Mayor, he didn't sign up, so we can call him if you do want to hear from him. He's ready to be called, but he's not on the line currently.
Okay, do we have specific questions? I mean, the questions about the size and the volume. Seems to me that he could address that unless you have, is everybody good with the answers that they received? You're good? Okay, then is Jen Truman on the line?
Yes, Mayor.
Okay.
Hey y'all, I'm still here. I get to be nicer this time. I'm really excited about this text change. Numerous clients of mine have asked about what's up with this text change. They're really excited to hear that there's an opportunity to expand their bar into brewing or their brewery into a new location. The ability and availability of IX zoned properties is very tight right now, as most leasing is, but allowing these small microbreweries and cideries to experiment, to create products that are in high demand in more places in our city is great for economic development and great for the small local businesses that this type of microbrewery and cidery and distillery are. So just speaking on behalf of numerous current, past, and future clients, this is a great idea. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Jen, and happy holidays to you.
You too.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions, Councilmember Cox?
Yes. You mentioned an applicant for this text change. I was wondering who the applicant is because I don't see it in the documentation.
Mac Paul was the original applicant who requested the text change.
Was that on behalf of someone?
I don't know if he had a specific client in mind or if it was just a global request.
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Buffkin?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I may be premature. Have we closed the hearing?
Not yet. I was asking if there are any questions. Right, if there are no other questions, I will close the hearing. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Buffkin?
Well, I would say, Mayor, I agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Truman's comments, and I would add that these types of businesses are good for community too. It's a gathering place, and when we go out to breweries, our dogs are welcome, and we enjoy visiting with neighbors of all ages, kids running around having fun playing, and I could say a lot more about this. I'm a big fan of it. I've already said enough. So I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated December 7, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning text amendment.
Okay, seconded by Councilmember Melton. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Clerk, that was unanimous. Thank you. Hey, we've come to the end of the evening. I want to thank everybody who showed up tonight for public comment and also for our public hearings. I want to thank all of you for your service. I want to wish all of you a happy holiday, you and your families. Enjoy your break, because when January comes back, we're going to have a lot to do. So thank you, everyone. Have a great night.